Hello, and welcome. I am Chilling Tales. And as you get ready for bed, you must know that you are doing amazing and you deserve all the sleep you can get. So as you are winding down, let me know where you are from and what time you are watching this video. Like and subscribe to help the channel if you'd like. Now put your mind at ease and let the story unfold. They warned me not to take Harlow's Bend after midnight. Every town has a road like it, the shortcut you only admit you use in daylight, the strip of cracked asphalt that feels too narrow for two cars, even though it's striped for them, the kind of place headlights never quite reach far enough. Harlow's Bend was ours. It cut through a stand of oak that had learned to lean, past a ravine that swallowed tires when the shoulder gave, across a creek that had a way of flooding only in the dark. You could make it from my sister's place on the North Ridge to my apartment on Oak and Riverside in 15 minutes on the highway, or in 9 if you shaved the curve, skipped the town lamps, and trusted your brakes. I trusted my brakes. I had trusted them for years. It was the rest of the car, me, that had started to feel suspect. I left my sister's later than I meant to. We'd been in the attic again, sorting through what our mother left, a veil sealed in a zip bag that had gone the color of tea, photo albums with paper corners losing their glue, a music box that had never once wound without squealing like it was objecting to being asked to remember. We found our father's army jacket and a letter he never sent. We found the half-finished baby sweater our mother had started for a child that didn't make it to winter. We found at the bottom of a tub of Christmas lights 3 Polaroids of Harlow's Bend in daylight from before the county stopped mowing the ditches. Ribbons of road, nothing to be afraid of. By the time we'd put it all back in different boxes and had exactly the same argument about exactly the same things, keep, trash, no, that's not trash. Rain had started, big lazy drops that hit the porch light like moths. My sister offered the couch. I said no. I thought I needed to drive, and if I had stayed, I would have taken the couch long enough to dream the kind of dream that makes you square your shoulders for 3 days. The highway was closed after the river bridge. A crane stood where lanes should be, blinking red like a scolding. The detour sign pointed toward town, long and patient. Harlow's Bend cut 30 minutes off the drive. The sign didn't say not to. The rain wasn't bad yet. I told myself the stories were for kids. I told myself I lacked that caliber of superstition. So I turned down the bend. The first mile is always fine. It's a 2-lane with a line that's more suggestion than law, and the trees don't lean yet. They stand there like they're making themselves available for the idea of a forest. The first culvert rattled my tires the way it always did. I passed the rusty mailbox with no name, where teenagers leave notes for each other in summer. The gap in the fence where the deer pretend they need an invitation. My wipers squealed their small, infuriated squeal. At the second mile, the trees close in. Even in daylight, there's a hush there, the air gone mossy and heavier. At night, the oaks knit their branches like women in pews, and the road loses the word shoulder. My headlights always feel weaker here, like they're working through grief. This time they felt like they were working through my grief. I leaned forward, chin over the wheel, and tried not to make bargains with my own eyes. The sign came up too fast, and also right on time. Slow curve ahead. It's a rectangle pitted with rust and old BB shots, the kind of sign the county replaces every other year, and this road eats as practice. It was swaying on its post, just slightly, though the night had gone windless. The rain hit it, ping, ping, and the swaying didn't change. Okay, I said out loud. Saying okay to nobody is a way of telling yourself you're the one who gets to answer. I eased my foot. The car did that float thing it does when you find the edge between control and the road, doing you a favor. The radio crackled to life. I hadn't turned it on. Static bleached the air, then cleared like someone lifting a bowl off a candle. Under it, a voice, not a station, not a song, a voice in the register of a person trying not to panic. Don't stop, it whispered, shredded, no matter what you see. I thumbed the dial out of reflex. The needle didn't move, or it moved and the sound didn't change. The voice shivered up through the speakers, as if it was using my wire. Keep driving, it said. Not louder, exactly. Closer. I pressed the power button. The radio went dead. The silence after had a texture, fine like dust. The curve is tighter than it looks. You can make it without touching the center line if you've had enough practice, and nothing unexpected is there to argue. My lights swung, slick across black. They slid over bark, over wet. They found the woman standing at the shoulder. She wore white. Maybe it had been white once. Now rain had glued it to her body. A slip, or a dress, or some nightgown that shouldn't have been anywhere but a house. Hair dark with water stuck to her cheeks. One hand lifted, thumb out, that old American prayer. I have driven past men with signs, and women with strollers, and boys who thought they could outrun cars. I know how not to stop, but she lifted her head and looked straight through the windshield into me. Her eyes were my mother's. I braked so hard the back of the car did a little prayer to physics. The tires hissed on the wet. We stopped. We stood in it. Me, the engine knocking like a nervous knee. Her, head canted, rain dividing into small insistences on her jaw. Mom? I said, because reflex is bigger than adulthood. Her lips opened like she was learning how again. Please, she said, caught between breath and word. It's cold. Let me in. There's the part of your brain that remembers what 7 feels like. There's the part that has a stack of notices about this exact situation clipped and waiting in a drawer. It's not her, the adult told me, efficient. It's the road. You don't know that, a smaller voice said, sullen, and I hated it for sounding like me. I thumbed the lock. She slipped in like rain slips under doors. You swear you closed. The smell of her was rain, and something tinny I didn't want to identify. Her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a nurse to take her back. Up close she had my mother's face, and also not. The planes were right. The story underneath wasn't. Thank you, she said, and smiled, and the smile was almost right. Then I glanced in the rear view. A man sat in the back seat. I hadn't heard the door. I hadn't felt the shift of weight. He was just there, thin the way hungry can be elegant, a gray suit that didn't belong anywhere but a photograph, a grin that didn't have anything to do with a mouth. I jerked the wheel. The car swayed. Who are you? I asked the mirror. The woman didn't turn. She stared ahead through the fogging glass like a patient in a waiting room they keep too cold, the expression blank and effortful. The man leaned forward until his mouth was near my ear, and the cold of him went through the cotton of my shirt as if it had been waiting for that particular patch of skin. You shouldn't have stopped, he said, almost politely. Now it knows you. I floored the gas. The car fishtailed, caught itself, roared. The curve stretched, then collapsed. Trees became lines, and then noise. The woman didn't move. The man's laughter came from behind my face. The next sign came sooner than it should have. Same rust freckles, same tilt, slow curve ahead. I cursed and braked, and my car stopped in exactly the same place it had before, down to the way the hood dipped. She was there again. The woman, white gone transparent, thumb out, the wet shine of her face. I spun to the passenger seat. Empty. To the back. Empty. The radio hissed as if it had been breath the whole time. Don't stop, the voice said, faint enough for honesty. Don't stop again. I believed that. I believed it enough to hurt. I dropped the car into drive and went around wide. My light swept her face just enough for me to see she had stopped trying to look like my mother. She wore some other arrangement of bones now, something hungrier. Her mouth widened, as if to take a mouthful of my car, and then she did what all animals do when you don't give them what they flatter themselves to be owed. She smiled like she'd be patient. The road kept looping. I don't mean I kept getting lost. Lost is when choices become stories, and every story fights for your mouth. This was a loop. I could have set my watch by it if my watch had not stopped at the moment the radio found a voice. Rain blurred the windshield. The speedometer found speeds I don't usually offer it, and every time the sign slid out of the trees like a repeat. Every time the bend made the shape of itself, and the shoulder offered the woman like a test nobody passes the first time. I drove past her 5 times. 6. On the 7th, she wasn't on the shoulder. She was in the middle of the road, hands at her sides like a girl waiting for a photo. I didn't stop. I didn't stop because I am capable of obedience when it is the only weapon left. I leaned on the horn, and my car's poor voice made the hollow sound like it was protesting a tax. I swerved around her, wide enough to spray the ditch, and for a full second we were window to window, and she tilted her head as if to memorize the angle of mine. I drove. The loop does not forgive, but it learns. By the 10th pass, there were more of them. A boy I'd sat next to in sophomore English, hair still blonde and likely forever now wet. My father sober and unhandsome, which is how he tried to be near the end. My first kiss, which felt like a cruelty because it reminded me of poor judgment that had not required supernatural assistance to acquire. They stood in the rain, or sat on the guardrail that hasn't guarded anything since the year they paved the road and forgot to pave sense into it. They raised thumbs. They kept their smiles gentle until you got just close enough to see how they were welded on. The radio was not a voice now. It had turned into voices. They overlapped the way people on party lines used to. A murmur of advice that would have been easier to ignore if any of it had been unkind. Keep going. This part ends. Don't give under the name. One voice came through clearer when I passed the sign. My mother's voice, not the imitation. It said, "Don't pick me up," which is something she never had to say in life, because I have never been able to let anything sit where it wanted without asking it if it needed water. At some point, the numbers on my dash gave up. The green went out of them and left them as absent as the moon. The needle on the fuel gauge headed toward my failure. I did the math you do when you are stuck in a story, and the only way out is to live long enough for it to end. The math did not like me. On the 14th loop, the man in the back seat was there again. No door, no shift, just the particular cold his mouth makes when it wants your ear. "We can do this all night," he said, conversational, like truckers at a counter at 2 a.m. "I can't," I said, and my voice almost broke on the T. He clucked his tongue. "You can't imagine what you can do when you're invited properly." I pressed my finger into the soft place of my palm until the pain brought prayer back into the range of things I remembered how to do. On the 15th loop, something changed enough to frighten me beyond anger. The curve tightened, not by much, by the thickness of a promise. The oaks leaned another angle in, made a roof of the road, shrugged off the sky. My headlights hit a wall of rain, so heavy it looked like a curtain. The sign swayed as if someone had bumped it walking by. When the car broke through that sheet, the air tasted wrong. Less fresh, sharp, like damp copper. "We're in deeper," the man in the back seat said, pleased. "Good. Sometimes it takes a while for you to learn to listen." "I'm listening to the radio," I said, surprised by how steady I sounded. It told me not to stop. "Oh," he said, "that's me too." And he laughed. The laugh wasn't cruel. It wasn't anything. It was patience pretending to be sociable until patience could eat. On the 19th loop, the figure on the shoulder was a girl in a jacket too big for her, jeans rolled to keep from dragging. The eyes were not anyone I knew. The mouth was. It was mine, at 13, when I discovered what a mirror could do to you if you held its gaze too long without a purpose. She lifted her thumb like hitching was a skill she'd been looking forward to mastering. I rolled past her. The radio whispered, "Good." My hands were cramping from the way I was holding the wheel. My right calf had started to send up fireworks every time I asked it for gas. I wondered if I could make the loop on cruise control and if letting the car pretend to be me would count as surrender. I did not try to find out. On the 23rd loop, there was a light. It wasn't the sign. It wasn't a car. There hadn't been any cars since the crane. It was the yellow square of a window, way off through the trees, up the hill past the bend. It looked like a gas station looks in the middle of nowhere when you have learned how to believe in good luck again. The voice on the radio went quiet. That was how I knew this light was dangerous. I gritted my teeth and drove past the curve and the shoulder with no one on it, and the place where the oaks made a tunnel and the sign that had been waiting. The yellow stayed with me. Then it was ahead again, closer. The road is a thing that thinks it is a straight line until you ask it to be. I reached a cross street that I've never seen in daylight. Four-way stop, wet paint bright, a sign with 3 places I didn't know. On the far corner, a service station that hadn't been built in this county any time I'd been alive. Glass on 3 sides, old pumps with belly dials, a Coke machine that was trying to remember its youth. The bell on the drive clicked when my tires went over it. Inside, a man stood up from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag, and smiled right at me. The door to the station swung open before I had time to decide whether my car would turn itself off if I removed the key. The man waved like we'd known each other. He wore coveralls with Harlows stitched over the breast. His hair had the shine of men who know where grease lives. The light behind him made a rectangle of his shoulders and cut a square out of the rain. "Lucky night," he said. His voice came through glass. It felt like it came up through the floor of my car. "You're near out, aren't you?" I checked the gauge. If it had any truth left, it said I was a quarter from being interesting. He laughed. "You're past empty. We can top you off. Come on in and sign." I turned the radio back on with a finger I couldn't feel. Static. Then a voice I recognized because it had told me to eat when I didn't want to sit when sitting was the worst. "Don't go inside," my mother said, very tired and very exact. The rain slackened in that way. Rain does when it wants you to feel sorry for it. Harlow, if that's what he was wearing, and that's what he wanted to be, leaned his hip against the door jamb and scratched a cheek that didn't itch. "Your mother," he said, friendly, "always thought she could keep you from making friends." I should have driven. I should have backed out with my hands steady. Instead, I reached for the handle on instinct, the human thing where another human is framed in bright, and you think, yes, door. The minute my fingers closed, the man's smile widened. Not like a smile does, but like a drawer does, and for a full second, the light behind him went wrong. Too cold, too white, not light at all. But the idea of light, so bright, I saw the tiny bones in his hand raised in welcome. I drove. He didn't shout. He didn't chase. He stood there with his rag, and the bell on the drive clicked twice, and the yellow square died like a TV set, clicking off. After that, the loop was different. The oaks leaned away a hair, as if embarrassed. The sign had a fresh BB scar. The smell of wet copper faded to old rain. On the 26th pass, the woman in white stood on the shoulder with her thumb out and her mouth composed and her eyes not anyone's eyes anymore. I did not stop. The radio said nothing. I decided I didn't believe in voices. The gas needle went under the red line and then under whatever goes under red. The car complained like a child who has learned the word no and enjoys its mouthfeel. I said okay to nobody again. I loosened my hands. I waited to coast and knew that when I did, there would be no shoulder to save me. The car coughed, caught, coughed. On the 29th loop, halfway between the sign and the center of the curve, the engine let go like a lover who had been kind for longer than anyone would expect. The rain had gentled to a lick. The wipers squealed, and then went still because I switched them off to hear what absence sounds like. The road carried me. Momentum, then stubbornness. The car rolled almost politely, as if it had been reminded of manners it learned in a driveway and decided to show them to me. The woman stood in the middle of the road again. Her dress clung and defined. Her hair drew letters down her neck. She did not raise her thumb. She raised her hand, palm out, the sign you use to make someone stop from across a room without talking. And because my foot was already on the brake, it felt like obedience. I could have let the car do what it would do and aim for shoulder and stall and sit with her at the window while she learned my mother's mouth again. I put it in neutral and steered for the edge. The tires found gravel. Gravel found ditch. The car settled with a long, relieved exhale, as if it had been trying to spare my feelings by taking its time. She walked toward the driver's side slow, the way women in bad commercials walk toward convertibles. Her face was my mother's again. She had found the exact wrong smile. Please, she said, and it was my mother's voice with the morphine gravel in it, and also the small humor a person uses when you are disappointing them. Don't be cruel. I'm not, I said, which was the first true thing I had said to the road. I'm busy. She laughed with both sides of her mouth. Behind her, in my back seat through the fogged glass, something made the shape of sitting. The radio clicked on by itself and made a sound like a phone connecting. A second voice. A man said, "We're almost done," as if we were both waiting for a bus. I cracked the window an inch. The air smelled like petrichor and old pennies, and the mint gum my mother chewed when she stopped smoking. What happens if I get out? I asked. The woman cocked her head. Rain streamed. You walk, she said. You walk back to where you were supposed to go, and when you turn around to see how far you've come, the road will be behind you as if it had never existed. Will you follow? She looked amused. I'm always in front. I closed the window. I turned the key. The engine offered me the small wheeze a pet gives when you try to coax it back past wanting. The radio whispered, "Foot now," and I put my foot on the gas as if the car could be tricked into remembering that wanting and doing are cousins. It coughed. It died again. I sat with my hands open on my knees. Rain dotted my jeans through the crack in the seal where the door had never fit right. In the rear view, the man leaned forward, closer now, as if about to tell me a recipe. You know, he said, there's a way to make this pleasant. You pretend your grief is a passenger, and you give it your lap, and you keep your hands on the wheel, and when it reaches for your throat, you call that intimacy. Is that what you want? I asked. Intimacy? That, he said, or patience. He put his hands on the back of my seat and the springs in its side. My mother knocked on the glass. Not anger, not demand. The knock of a person who expects to be let in because you love her and also because she is cold. I looked at her hands. The nails were wrong. My mother bit her nails until they were careful, half moons of small shame. These were clean, oval, perfect, and that was what saved me. I'm sorry, I said, to the wrong hands, and the dress, and the rain, and the road, and the voice that had used the radio like a throat. I can't help you. When I put my hand on the key again, the engine started. No coaxing, no cough, just the ordinary small miracle of pistons remembering their shoulders. I slid the car back onto the asphalt like I was leaving a dance with a partner who would tell stories about me later. The woman's face fell through 3 expressions too many to belong to one person. The man in the back laughed once, the laugh of a person who lost at cards and has decided to be excellent about it. And then the radio said in my mother's true voice, "Go." So I went. The loop didn't break. That would be too much like a moral. It thinned. The oaks made a little room. The sign swayed like someone had kicked it from a passing truck. The curve felt less confident about its own geometry. When the bend unspooled into straight, and the trees on either side returned to being trees instead of audience, The yellow light of town found me like it had been waiting for an apology. The car ran on fumes and relief into the empty grid of 2 a.m. My streetlights are sodium orange. They made the wet look warm. I parked under the tree that drops helicopter seeds in spring like a dad showing off for his kids. The engine ticked, rain softened to memory. When I turned the key off, the radio clicked and then whispered, so soft I thought I might be inventing it. Home. I sat there long enough for the windshield to fog over the places where my hands had been. When I lifted them, they left prints that looked exactly like prints. In the rear view, there was nothing but the back seat, and my jacket thrown on it, and the dent where I'd once dropped a toolbox and lied to my landlord about it. The woman's face, my mother's face, did not swim up. The man did not make himself comfortable. The road did not find a way into my cul-de-sac and rest his elbows on my hood and ask me to step outside. Inside, I hung my keys on the hook my sister insists we have so I won't lose them. I went to the bathroom and turned the light on and looked into the mirror because sometimes bravery is just that mundane. My face was my face. The glass behind it reflected the open door, the hallway with the thrift store runner, the frame of a photograph I had hung crooked a year ago and stopped seeing. I slept with my shoes by the door and a towel over the bedroom mirror. I woke 3 times to the sound of rain that wasn't there. Once I woke to the sound of the radio in the living room, trying to tune itself. I got up and found it unplugged and put the plug on top of it like a parent does to a remote. In the morning, the sun made a promise it doesn't have to keep. I called my sister and said I was coming back to help with the attic. She asked if I'd taken the bend. I told her I'd taken the long way. Neither of us used the words for those 2 things. I don't drive Harlow's Bend. Not after midnight. Not when the rain starts. When people say shortcut, I say no. When teenagers at the diner say they saw the woman in white, I ask them what shoes she wore, and if they say they didn't look, I pay for their coffee, and I say next time, look at hands. Hands never learn how to lie correctly. Sometimes late, when the wind comes down from the ridge and the night learns where it forgot to be quiet, my radio will click in the living room. Once it said softly, keep driving, like a goodbye that did not require my answer. Once it said my name in the voice I already carry inside me, which is my mother's, and I said nothing back because some loves stay the size they are only if you don't feed them the wrong thing. If you take Harlow's Bend after midnight, you might make it. People do. Most come back with a story that gets longer in the retelling and a smile that tries too hard for your benefit. A few come back and stop smiling as if they've used the muscles up and are saving them. A handful don't come back in the way that gets counted. If you go, keep the radio off or on. If you're the kind of person who needs a voice to argue with, don't stop. The woman will be someone you know or someone you wish you had. If you must look, look at hands. Don't follow yellow squares into lit rooms that don't belong to your day. If you stall, it will ask you to be polite. You may be everything else you are, but don't be that. When you get home, and you will, if you keep your hands and your yes to yourself, sit in the quiet and listen to your house breathe. Put a towel over the mirror if it makes you feel like you made a decision. Call the person who keeps your spare key and tell them you were going to call anyway. If the radio clicks and a voice uses your mother's grammar, remind the air that you already know how to drive. Sometimes the bend will try to be in front of you again. Sometimes it will be. When it is, there is no trick, only this. Keep moving. The loop likes patience. Don't loan it yours. And if the road says your name exactly right, don't give it the comfort of correcting its pronunciation. Keep both hands on the wheel. Remember the sign. Let the curve be a curve and not a commandment. Count to the far side. When you reach it, do not look in the rear view to check. The bend loves that. It loves to be believed. Let it wonder instead. Let it stand there in the rain with its bad mouth and patient friends and the yellow square waiting for someone who doesn't know better, and let it tell itself stories about you in which you were kinder than you had to be and still didn't stop. That's how you win on Harlow's Bend, not by defeating anything, but by refusing to audition for the part it's been saving for you since the first sign swayed and no wind moved it. Now, on to the next story. The sign above the door still said WRX 1310 AM, but the bulbs behind the letters were half dead, so most nights it read something closer to WRX. The X felt appropriate. It sounded like a kiss and a warning, and the shape a map uses when it wants you to turn around. I took the night shift for the same reason people take night shifts in places like this, because no one else wanted it, and because the money wasn't good enough to be anyone's first choice. The station sits where the city gets thin and the river fattens up. Old warehouses with their windows bricked in, a handful of tire shops, a diner with a neon coffee cup whose steam pulses in slow red breaths. When the sun is up, the whole block smells like hot rubber and old oil. When the sun's down, it smells like a motel room that forgot who stayed there last. Board op, voice, light maintenance, the station manager told me. Her office had 2 desks, one for payroll and one for the cat. The cat chose mine. Midnight to 6. Keep the logs clean. The tower hums in a big storm. Don't panic. We've got a generator, but the switch is sticky. Kick it. Any callers? I asked because I was not a child and knew what dead stations feel like in the bones. You'll get some, she said. Old people who forget to sleep. Third shift nurses, the man who makes breakfast for snowplow crews when it snows. They'll keep you company. And requests? She smirked like a lint roller. Darling, you don't have the licenses for much of that anymore. But sure, if they ask for Patsy Cline, slide on a cover so the big boys don't bite. Talk a lot, it's cheap. Rocks used to be a local legend. Before my time, and my father's barely. A baritone with a tasteful mustache kept half the valley alive through layoffs and ice storms. The station's photo wall still held his framed headshot. Part newsman, part Friday night dad. Then the company in another state bought the licenses and split the day in leases. Syndicated chatter, daytime sports, religious hour with a preacher whose voice sounded like a shoe polishing itself. Night was junk shop time. Night was me. The booth was small, God's own aquarium, if God had bad tastes. Brown carpet, foam squares on the wall gone the color of tea. A console older than my first crush, the board patched with tape where mic 1 used to be and where phone sometimes pretended. A window looked into the bullpen that no shows used anymore. Beyond that, a hallway with framed black and white photos from the station's good years, and a door that stuck in humidity. A sign over the hallway switch, "Do not turn off the red light, under any circumstances." The red light hung over the outside door like a drunk moon and burned whenever we broadcast. It meant on air to anyone who knew. It meant something else to me by the second week. I started the way you start in a haunted house, by pretending you're the one doing the haunting. "Good midnight, Valley," I said, my voice lower than it is in my human life. "You're up late with rocks, caffeinate me if you can. Keep me awake if you can't. Nurses, write me. Drivers, honk in a beautiful key when you pass a red light swinging over a tired door." People called. Her name was Dee Dee. She worked laundry at Mercy and wanted something with a backbeat to keep her legs moving. A man I assumed was divorced because of how carefully he didn't mention anyone. Asked for an old love song and then said, "Never mind, I shouldn't." A woman who wouldn't give a name just breathed for a minute and said, "Finally, he's asleep. Can you just talk to me until I'm sure?" I talked. The night talked back. The tower hummed. The first time the phone rang without ringing, I figured the line was dirty. You know the sound old wires make when they realize there is no longer enough world on the other side to carry them properly? That quick, soft chirp like a bird practiced into silence? It did that. The light didn't blink, but the line was there. I punched it because silence is harder to sell than even a bad voice and said good midnight. Warox? A woman breathed. She had the careful cadence of a person who practiced being calm when she didn't want to be. It sounded like she was in a closet without room to kneel. Is it you tonight? She asked. Depends, I said, my hand hovering over the pot fader because I am not a fool. Who am I supposed to be? The one in the glass, she said. You're new. Newish, I said, and in the window my face looked like someone I hadn't met yet. I like the way you keep the levels even, she said. The last one let the songs hurt. They hurt anyway, you know. You don't have to help. I told her my name, and she took it and rolled it around like a lozenge. I need you to stay on, she said. Urgent now. All the way to 6. Don't play whatever he asks you to. He'll call. He always calls when the red light is clean. The preacher? I asked, trying a joke to keep my lungs from weeping in public. No, she said softly. The other one. A click. The line didn't hang up. It ended, like a half-remembered dream, when the cat jumps on your chest. The red light over the back door flickered once. The tower's hum deepened a half-step, as if the weather had decided to harmonize. At 1:17 a.m., the real ring came, BRRNN, like a small bell inside a cereal box. I punched the line and hit the delay because I am a little bit trained. Good midnight, WRX. Static, then a man's voice, new and old, the way a song sounds when someone presses a warble button. You're late. Actually on time, I said, glancing at the atomic clock the manager had taped to the wall, with the seriousness of a room where the minute hand used to matter. You're early, he laughed. I have heard lovely laughs in my life, and awful ones, and the ones that sound like someone trying on a laugh to see if it fits. This one had a seam. It sounded like a thing once broken and recently set. Play me something, he said, something with an engine in it. Specific. I scrolled through the library. The legal stuff was thin, the gray stuff was deep. Recordings of local bands that signed away rights for a joke. Tracks from a basement cover act who gave us 3 CDs of Springsteen-ish that wasn't, backups we didn't deserve to have. My hand hovered over a track titled 3-Lane Mercy and then dragged itself to a stack of PSAs instead. The man hummed behind the static. The red light brightened. I can talk to you, I said brightly. I can keep you awake. I don't sleep, he said without brag. I prefer to drive. We love a driver. I flicked all the faders to make noises come and go, because a board in motion is almost music. What kind of road? Empty, wet, no signs. Ha, I said nervously. Our valley. The DOT is going to call me if you keep slandering them. He chuckled again. The chuckle had teeth. A song, he said, bored now. You'll learn I don't call twice. Am I learning? I asked to cut the fear in two. What is this, training? Apprenticeship, he agreed, but you don't like that word. A click, not a hang-up. The feeling a night gets when someone leaves the building without opening a door. When I stood at the glass and looked past my face, the bullpen was empty as it had been all night. A chair had shifted slightly, as if someone had gotten up in a hurry to make a point. I put on a weather bed and read the hour pronounced precipitation like it was a guest, added a joke about how no one needs a forecast if they have joints with opinions. Did the thing voices do, or they turn fear into filler? I told myself the delay meant I could stop anything before it slid into the room. I told myself the red light was a kind of spell, a circle the station had drawn for 50 years to convince the dark that it should listen and not eat. At 1:23, the phone chirped without the light again. I hit it. Warox. Don't, the woman said. He makes you talk, and then he makes you play it back to him later, and takes the part he needs. What part? I asked. The part that thinks nothing bad can happen if you keep talking, she said. I have to go. I'm in the broom closet and Mrs. Owens just came in for more toilet paper. Click. Who are you? I asked an empty line. The red light hummed. The tower responded, like a bridge under too many feet. By 2 a.m., my voice had learned how to put itself in a lower place and stay there. The script in front of me turned to scribbles, the scribbles to words no one wrote. I read copy for a farm implement dealer who had moved his lot 5 years ago and had a name like a man who used to give kids cigars. I read a PSA about a county fair that had burned down before I was born. I read the top of the hour legal ID in a cadence I'd never practiced. This is WRX 1310 AM, bringing you the night the way you ask for it. It felt like reading an oath. At 2:36, the on-air red light outside blinked. One blink. All our gear is old, the manager had said. It drinks power like a teenager, but that blink had timing. It happened exactly when I turned down the bed and left space for a breath. Outside, down the hallway, the door latch sighed, then decided against it. You learn a building's noises fast. Which ones are the compressor, the ice machine trying its best, the raccoon overhead deciding whether to move in? Which ones are the ones that come from inside your head? Hunger noises, exhaustion scraping. The sigh at the latch was neither. It was the sound a door makes when a polite person pretends to knock just by leaning close. The tower hummed the way a person hums to make you forget they have a mouth. I put a CD in and hit play on a jazz thing we did have the paper for because dead men's catalogs are bigger. 2:03, I said, stupidly to the air. If you're crossing the viaduct, watch the black ice near the fourth seam. Yes, the fourth, and don't pretend you don't know what I mean. The chirp. No light. Once, the woman said. Just once, I answered, when he asked my name. He said it back to me like he was making sure it fit. He called me by that name for 50 minutes until the red light went out with the dawn, and then he didn't know me anymore. Please don't say your name again. I have to, I said automatically. It's the law. Not to him, she said, and suddenly she was on 2 lines at once, her voice in the phone and her breath in the window glass. The booth filled with a smell like cold rain on turned dirt. If you feel the need to explain yourself, you are already doing what he wants. Click. I filled between songs like a fireman's arm. The board seemed to know my hand. The little start buttons glowed warm as if my fingers were their plan. My throat went dry, and I drank coffee that had been made in the last administration. My pulse learned the routes of each ad break as if the console had laid them in as paths for animals. At 3, I swore I heard the baritone from the old station Headshot chuckle from the hallway, a friendly sound with one extra tooth in it. PSA from the library, I said, queuing up a recording from whatever era WROX had money for a library. Story hour Saturdays 11 to noon, no unattended children, a reasonable request. The child in the recording laughed on cue, too high. The laugh elongated like tape left on a radiator. The red light outside burned brighter. Call in and tell me about the best, worst road you ever drove, I said, panicking toward Small, because people call up the perfect roads, and those are never true. The chirp again. What's your best, worst road? I asked, ready to hang up if laughter came with seams. County 12, a male voice said flat, before they fixed the shoulder. Ah, I said, because that road eats cars when it has nothing better to do. The place where the crossbuck leans because there's absolutely a train and absolutely no track. Right, he said, and then the voice changed. He said my name, the way a parent does when they're about to ask you to get in the car, because the hospital is where you need to be. Play me something with drums. No, I said, before the part of my brain that does social grease could step in. We've got no license for anything except a sad version of Take 5. Play me the Not Quite, he said, and the radio's delay light flared and died as if the thing in between me and the air decided it could get there quicker, another way. I put on the PSA again. Remember, I said, my mouth speaking while the rest of me went still. We don't exist without you. If you're drunk, don't drive. If you're lonely, call me. If you're tired, pull over at the diner with the neon cup and tell them W.R. Oaks sent you. They'll give you a refill. Tell them I sent you. The man on the line said in my head, not in my ears, and the red light outside fluttered like breath on glass. I am not brave. I am not a hero in the way stories like to sell hero. I did not recite scripture or salt the threshold. I did what night shift people do. I chose the next small thing I could do and did it stubbornly until it looked like courage. I slid a CD into the disc tray and played 2 minutes of Rain because the station had a local artist who had recorded City at Night with a hand mic and a roof. Then I brought my own mic up and told a story about a night the automatic car wash downtown ate my mother's bumper and the manager apologized with a voucher booklet so fat we washed a car we didn't even own yet. The console's lights looked like a quiet Christmas. The tower hummed to itself, and the hum felt like a dog deciding to lie back down after it has already stood up. At 3:45, the door opened. Not the back door, the hallway door, the one I had deadbolted and chain locked out of habit. I heard the chain go tight and stay that way. The door moved about half an inch into the room and held there, polite, while the chain chose its side in a conversation I wasn't invited to. The red light flickered and didn't fail. I tasted pennies. I didn't turn to look. I learned that from an old man in a different city who used to sit up with dying people and said turning toward certain doors makes them wider. I told a different story, this one about a gas station night clerk who used to let me count his packs of Marlboros when I was 9, and he wasn't supposed to let kids in the booth, and he did anyway, and taught me change, which is kindness, no matter what the world says it is. The door eased back and closed. The chain sighed as if it had been complimented on its figure. It's harder when they're polite, I said into a microphone no one had asked a question into. At 4, the woman called again. It was the real Rain this time. You're doing well, she said. He's bored. He's in a car with the windows cracked and the heater making sounds. He wants to drive through the city and listen to the station bleed into another. He wants to catch you as you ghost out. Her breath warmed the glass. Frost formed where she said my name without saying it. Don't say you'll keep him company. I won't, I said. I'll keep other people company, and he can listen to that. Better, she said. Tell them something they can hold on to when the red light goes out. So you're real, I said, because no one should trust untested angels. Not exactly, she said. I'm one of the things that happens when people need to talk into the dark, and the dark needs someone to talk through. We organize ourselves after a while. We hold our own hands. Are you dead? I asked, which is a rude question, and the only one I had strength to carry. I am on the side of the glass that doesn't fog, she said, which is not the same. Why do you care? I asked. Why me? Because your voice is tidy, she said. Tidy, I repeated, offended. It has corners, she said. Things with corners can keep the rain off people. Sometimes you keep the rain off things that do not deserve it. Her tone cooled. You will never play him what he asks for, even when he makes you want to. Promise. I promise, I said, and the room breathed the small sigh of a contract signed. By 5, it felt like the booth and I had become one instrument. The board sliders were a spine. I scratched a note, and the station changed shape. I lied, and the ceiling dipped. I told the truth, and something in the tower straightened. I told listeners about the diner's pot of coffee and about a deer in the median near mile marker 124 that had no interest in learning economics, and about a snowplow driver pulling in behind a school at 5 because a school should look like a promise even when the counties broke. Call me when you get to the light by the pharmacy, I told a nurse from Mercy. There's something about the 6th light on that pole that makes people cry. I'm not saying it will, I'm saying it might. So if it does, you'll know you can blame something that can't be hurt. At 5:30, the storm the station manager had promised rolled its shoulders over the river. The tower hummed in the exact note the red light liked. The generator clicked its tongue at me in the back hall, and I went and kicked it, and it breathed on the third kick. I could feel the man out there in the dark, drowsy with ask, getting nearer because boredom leads men to doors. He didn't knock this time. He waited for the station to ghost out at the top of the hour so he could slip between shows like a teethy eel. I did something the manager would have fired me for if we had this conversation in the morning. At 5:56, I turned off the automation. I killed the next show's stinger. I turned off the legal ID bed. I left the red light burning and the mic up. We don't have anything scheduled. I told the valley we've just got 4 minutes and a room and a sound. I could make a sound, the man said, without calling, without breathing, from a distance that felt too near. You won't, I told him, and then I spoke the only prayer I know that works. Inventory. I told the night what was in my pockets. Keys, too. Receipt for a coffee whose ink had decided not to be useful anymore. A coin from a foreign country I had never visited. A paperclip. Lint. A dried bean. I told the night what was on the board. One dead channel where mic 3 used to be. One half-alive phone. A CD with a play button that had never failed me. I told the night my full name. First, middle, last. Not into the phone or to the man, but to the people in their cars. To the nurse on the verge of the pole that weeps people. To the snowplow driver. To the old man walking his apartment. Because every step is a decision and the floor is a map. I told them my name so that later, if the man called and asked, I could say you missed it. I gave it to someone else. At 5:59:30, I said Wallach's 13:10 a.m. We are still here. At 6:1 the red light went out. Not a blink. Off. The hum of the tower changed to the low, uninteresting tone of proper business hours. I could feel the man's mouth make a shape of an annoyed smile. The chain on the door lifted itself slightly off the jamb, as if to say, we'll try again tonight. The coffee at the diner across the street pulsed once in its urn and then settled, like a body breathing in sleep. I didn't move. The cat stepped into the booth and rubbed against my shin as if she had come to collect something I had promised. I felt the shape of the night in my throat, how much I had fed it, and how much it had tried to take when I was distracted. The phone didn't ring. The delay light lay like a dead eye. The board looked like a cemetery before the gravedigger comes to mind. The flowers. At 6:07, the station manager opened the though-locked hallway door with a trick I had not known existed and said, you look like someone who almost quit. Almost, I said. What's the red light for? She didn't pretend not to know what I meant. It's a promise, she said. We keep it when we can. Who was the last one? I asked. The last night voice. She sighed. You'll see his picture on the wall with the mustache, she said gently. We found him asleep at the board with a song on loop and a ring mark from his coffee, and a smile like a person hearing applause in another room. Dead? I asked, as if dead were worse than what else I could imagine. Rested? She said. Anyway, don't worry. The red light doesn't ask you for anything you don't already want to give, which is the only kind of lie that works. I went home and slept through the day, and woke to a voicemail from the nurse, who cried at the sixth light. She said, you kept me company. The deer was there. I think you saved his life too, which is funny because I don't think deer have radio. The man didn't call. He doesn't need phones the way we do. He reads schedules. He listens for silence, the way men like me listen for footsteps in hallways. I took the night shift again and again and again, because it turns out I like talking to the valley when it pretends not to listen. It turns out I like being the circle a red light draws. It turns out I like learning the difference between a door being polite and a door being brave. The woman called sometimes not to say anything except keep the levels even. and wants to ask if you feel something standing behind you, and it is tall and careful, don't turn. Not yet. Give it a small story to hold, something with corners. I do. I tell the towers and the men in cars and the nurses and the tired and the dead and not of the valley, small stories with corners. I do not play him the songs he asks for. I play him rain sometimes because rain makes him quiet. I list what is in my pockets. I tell people my name at the top of the hour, where it belongs, so I won't be tempted to squander it later. I keep the red light burning until 6, even when storms kick it and the generator needs 3 kicks back. If you are driving at 1:17 a.m. and you hear a voice that makes you think of dark roads without signs, don't ask him to keep you company. Ask me. If you are in a closet behind a mop and a bucket, call from there. I will listen, and the red light will keep itself brave a little longer. If you have to pull over at the 6th light to cry for no reason, you can write down. Do it. I'll tell you the names of the things in my pockets until you are done. If you are tired, I will list the bridges and the roads that pretend to be straight and warn you about the deer who don't like economics. If a song with an engine keeps catching your ear, hum it, but don't let me hear you. He listens for that. He is always on the line that doesn't blink. When the dawn takes the red light, and I tell the valley the call sign and my full name, and say we are still here, know that I am saying it to the glass too. I am saying it to the door that breathes. I am saying it to the old mustache on the wall, and the cat, and the woman who lives on the breath side of the window, and to the tower that sings when it rains. We are still here. For now. Now, on to the next story. They called it the Gray Hollow Beast, though no one would admit to being the first to say it out loud. It lived, they said, where the ridge folded in on itself, and the wind forgot its route down in the bottom of the creek bed, where water pooled black and pines grew in a ring, like parishioners refusing to sit. If you stood at the edge of the trees at dusk, you could smell it, not rot exactly, but the thick iron sweetness that comes from a butcher block, wiped clean, but never clean enough. If you camped there, you woke with your boots moved 6 inches closer to the river and a paw print pressed into the mud where your face had been. Hunters sometimes came back with a story about a buck torn in a way no cat or coyote could manage. Teenagers came back with matching scars on their shoulders they said were from brambles. Some people didn't come back at all. It was a story I'd grown up with and a story I'd outgrown. Then my father died, and the ridge stopped being a place for legends and became a place where the world might stop talking for long enough that I could hear myself breathe. I walked out the day after the funeral with a pack and a canteen and the knife he used to take trout out of the river with kindness. The house was full of casseroles and advice. I wanted neither. The old men in town said, "Don't go down the hollow after dark." The old women in town didn't say anything at all, which meant they had opinions you weren't owed. My ex sent a text with a prayer hands emoji she would never use in person. I turned the phone off and stuck it at the bottom of my bag so its blank face wouldn't catch my eye and ask for promises. Past the last mailbox, the road turned to gravel, then to 2 ruts with grass in the middle. Pines leaned in like eavesdroppers. The hollow took sound the way quilts take heat. By the time the sun slipped behind the ridge and the cicadas started their idiot chorus, it felt like I was standing inside someone else's breath. I wasn't planning to sleep there. I wanted to stand in a dark that wasn't full of picture frames and sweaters that still held my father's shape, and then walk back with my head in one piece. Instead, I found a cabin where no map said a cabin should be. It sat down in the fold like a knot in a rope, boards gone silver, roof furry with moss, porch peeled down to splinters where feet used to learn the house's rhythm. No path, no chimney smoke, no signs of anybody except the lock on the front latch was new and bright as a coin. Someone had put money here. That was the first thing that scared me. The second was the symbol carved deep into the door, a circle made of short slash lines, jagged as if a child had tried to draw a sun from a memory that hurt. When I touched it with the tips of 2 fingers, it felt warmer than the wood around it, as if the day had sunk into it and decided to stay. The hollow went quiet between one heartbeat and the next. The cricket song cut off mid-word. The breeze that had been sorting needles through branches forgot to move. Even the creek behind me made a listening shape. I put the flat of my hand against the door and felt something like a hum, not electrical, not mechanical. The low, steady insistence you feel in your ribs when someone bigger than you is also in the room. That was when the first growl came, so deep I felt it before I heard it. Not far off, not other side of the clearing, right where the trees start. I turned and saw eyes, pale gray, rimmed red, set in a head that could have been a dog's if a dog had been left in a room with knives and had learned everything it could from the shapes they made. The body that followed the eyes was wrong, long in the forearm, hunched in the shoulder, matted fur slick with whatever eats blood for breakfast. It moved like it had never forgotten how to walk on 2 legs and resented being made to remember 4. Its gaze slid over me like a hand over a side of meat. There was nothing hungry in it. Hunger is honest. This was the patience of a butcher between customers. It came at me so fast my brain didn't have time to choose. My hand did. I yanked the latch. The door gave. I fell backward, slammed it behind me, and heard claws sketch the wood with the scream of enamel on plate. Inside smelled like iron filings and wet fur. The dark was the thick dark of a place that has been keeping a secret for a long time and has decided to go on keeping it in your presence. I got my light out with fingers that didn't want to obey and saw chains bolted into the walls at ankle height and wrist height and throat height, hooks in the rafters, a table with knives laid out in rows, blades honed down to hisses. On the table, a ledger-sized book open to a page with lines of careful handwriting that started precise and ended like someone writing in a moving car. The top of the page said, "I keep the circle." Below that, "The beast is not one. It is the many that can be one. It wears whoever meets its eyes too long. It speaks in voices that know what you love. It can be held by iron and intention, but not forever. If I fail, it takes me. If you are reading this, I have failed, or I am outside and busy failing. Lock the door. Do not answer if it uses a voice you know. Choose a knife that knows more than you. Sit in a corner where you can see both windows and pretend that makes you safe." I read it twice because the door shuddered twice, and the mind does what it can when it can't do anything useful. A claw found the latch through the gap where I'd not got it home, and rattled it like a man who refuses to admit he should go away. The wood groaned. The carved circle in the door seemed to warm under my palm. Then the scraping stopped. Silence went on long enough to start doing harm, and then a voice came through the wood. "Son, open up. It's me." My father's voice with the last 3 months of cigarettes it had held, and the last 3 weeks of morphine it had pretended not to want. He'd been in the ground exactly a day. I'd probably still had dirt under my fingernails. "Please," he said, "you don't have to be afraid. It's a stupid old story. It's only me." I swallowed. I made my mouth into a straight line and tucked it in. I looked down at the page. Someone had underlined "Do not answer" and scrawled beneath it, "Even if you're polite." "You always were a hard one," the voice said in a different tone, amused, as if it had remembered a joke it could use later. Then it laughed. The laugh was what happens when you put 2 incompatible substances in a pan and stir hard foam and black and things that never belong together. I sat in the corner with a knife that had white scarring along its spine and a grip worn down by a hand that had been holding more than wood, and I did what the book told me to do. I did nothing for as long as I could. The thing outside circled the cabin until the sky paled. Its claws ticked on wood and dragged on stone. Its breathing proved the size of its lungs. Sometimes it wept like a drunk on a porch. Sometimes it said my name, the way my ex says it when she's telling a story about me that has a punchline. Sometimes nothing at all, which was the worst, because you can't hold yourself rigid against a laugh or a name indefinitely. You fail somewhere. You fall asleep in a corner and wake with your head listing against a wall and the knife still in your hand. When the gray behind the trees turned into real morning, it went quiet with the satisfaction of a worker putting his tools down. I waited. I counted to the number that used to get me as a child, from here to the end of the block, back when I believed in bargains made with telephone poles and cracks. I got up when the light through the dirty windows went from soured milk to polite. I opened the door with the knife held stupidly, because knives don't make a difference when a story has decided to be true. No tracks, no fur snagged on a splinter, no claw marks in the porch except the ones on the door. Those the night had deepened and neatened, little slashes that had been scratches now becoming part of that carved circle, their angles righted, their lengths matched, like a kid who can't stand an unfinished drawing. I should have left then. If I'd been the person I had been a year ago, I would have walked out of the hollow using the same steps I'd used to get in. Grief makes you forget what you know. The hollow makes you learn what you wish you didn't. I took 2 hours in daylight to try every direction. North, the ridge gave itself up to bracken and tiny white mushrooms, and loops back to the clearing. South, the creek got wider, and then narrower, and then the same, and then the same again. East ended in a stand of young pines with identical scars at exactly the same height, as if something had paced them once and decided to count. West was a rabbit path that stayed a rabbit path and got bored of being one and dumped me into the hollow again, where the cabin waited like a laundry basket you'd been pretending not to see. The book had another page. It looked like someone had come back from doing something that let their wrists return to their hands and had sat while the adrenaline decided if it would leave. Iron restrains, salt confuses, chalk remembers, but only if you choose to stay inside. Do not chase. Do not try to cut anything that wears a familiar mouth. Gateways in this place do not open to roads. They open to repetitions. The beast runs the spiral the way water runs the sink. Survive 3 nights, and the circle closes. It will go on. You may leave. If you survive, you will not leave unchanged. Keep your eyes, keep your voice. If they call your name after, do not answer unless you can count your breaths while you do it. My father had taught me to count my breaths in other rooms, emergency rooms, courtrooms, living rooms where he was going to say something that would go wrong and needed me to keep my face soft. The words in the book felt exactly like the thing he would have said, except written by a person who had been fighting a wolf with a history degree. I took inventory. The cabin had a pump in the corner that brought up water like a throat brings up the last of a bad dream. A cupboard with 3 tins that had labels bleached down to nouns: beans, salt, matches, a nail keg with nails different enough to tell you a man had picked them up from more than one place. No bed, a single chair, the corner where I could see both windows. The second night the beast arrived before the light finished failing. Its shadow went past the window in a way that made the dirt on the glass stand up, as if dust could hum. In the lamplight its fur looked not brown or gray, but the color of old locks. Its back bristled where a back shouldn't. When it turned its head and looked in, the eyes were not lanterns, they were coins, cold and flat and expensive. It spoke in my voice, not through the door, inside my ear, as if there had always been a tunnel from the hollow back to the place behind my eyes. You don't have to make this hard, I told myself, using me on me the way you use a tool instead of a fist. Let it in. Wear me. Stop trying so hard to be the only thing keeping something in place. Teeth help. I pressed my palms to the table and felt the grain as if it were a relief map of a country that had survived both kinds of war, guns and old grudges. The knives on the table vibrated, not from any wind. My reflection in the dark window grinned when I didn't. I had nothing to fight with except choosing to sit, so I chose to sit. The beast tried new tones. It tried my ex, soft, saying the thing you want people to say when you've lost someone and they are tired of saying sorry. It tried Tamsin, laughing like a friend. It tried my boss, angry. It tried the old woman who ran the bait shop and had never said 3 words to me. The circle on the door warmed under my hand. Somewhere outside, something small startled and ran in a shape that a fox would have liked to follow. Toward morning, it went quiet. I slept the way people do in chairs when they're keeping vigil. 2 minutes, a minute. The space between breaths you can hold if you're not trying to impress anyone. The 3rd day, I stayed inside. The book said you could go out, and the trees would bring you back. It didn't say you couldn't leave yourself in little pieces along the way, like breadcrumbs, and come back emptier each time. I ate beans cold and drank pump water that tasted like pennies and iron and counted to numbers I hadn't used since catechism. The 3rd night it howled. The first 2 nights it had been gracelessly hungry. This time it announced. The sound went up the ridge and came back wrong, as if the hollow were a bell with a crack in it. The chain on the wall pulled tight, though nothing had gone into it. The hooks overhead trembled with the confidence of old mistakes. Open, my father said through the door, gentle, the way he had when I was 10 and had locked myself in the bathroom and decided I could live there if I had to. Son, please. The latch leaned. The door swelled. The carved circle deepened a shade darker, as if blood had chosen to move where it was most useful. I slid down the wood with my spine and put my shoulders into it and felt the bulk on the other side, press back the way oceans press. The book on the table had a last page I'd ignored because it felt like a man talking to himself, and now it felt like a man talking to me. If you have no silver, use names. If you have no names, use counting. If you cannot count, use pain. If you cannot feel pain, you have already opened the door. I put the point of the knife into the soft pad at the base of my thumb and shoved, not enough to maim, enough to make my ribs take a breath. My mouth had forgotten it could ask for. Blood came bright and annoyed. I smeared it across the carved circle without thinking, but with all the intention of a person who has run out of options and is willing to pretend that makes a plan. The latch popped. The door opened a finger's width. A claw came through. Black, curved, jointed wrong. It hooked under the latch and tugged like a man tugging loose a nail that had always belonged to him. I brought the knife down on the circle because it was a target, and because I wanted something to happen, and because sometimes breaking a thing is the only way to stop having to carry it. The knife bit wood. Not deep, enough. The circle broke. Light poured out of the door, the way breath pours out of a man who finally admits he is tired. Not daylight, not fire, silver, so clean it made the dirt of the room ashamed. The claw jerked back with a sound that would have been a word if it had had the right mouth. My father screamed, and then I screamed, and then something with too many voices screamed us both, quiet. Then quiet for real, the kind where you can hear the spiders working in the rafters. I sat for a long time with my back against the busted circle and my eyes blurry with the from the inside of your head kind of tears. When I could stand without feeling like a stopped clock, I pushed the door with my foot. It swung on its new, wrong radius. The claw marks were gone. The circle was a black smear like a handprint, ash flaking as if an old poster had finally given up. Outside, the hollow looked like it always had. Needles, mud, a wash of gray. The air moved again. A bird insulted me from a branch. The creek remembered it had appointments downstream. When I stepped off the porch, the ground didn't try to persuade me to change my mind. The trail out wasn't a trail so much as the opposite of being lost. Trees that had been leaning in leaned back. The ridge lifted its shoulder and let me go. It was noon by the time the last of the pines gave me up to the dirt road and the power lines and the world that likes to have names on things. People said I'd been gone a day. People said I'd been gone 3. The old men clucked. The old women gave me a look that had a chair in it if I wanted to sit. My ex called from a number I didn't answer and left a voicemail that started with "hey" and ended with not quite a sob. Tamsin came by with soup she'd made and forgotten to salt, and stayed on the porch because she said her reflection in my front window was doing things she didn't approve of. I told her to bring salt next time, and a roll of tape and a nail. I put iron in the house, not superstitious iron, actual chain across the back door's bottom to make the fit true. Bar stock screwed into the kitchen table's underside so it would stop rocking and start holding. A pair of steel washers hung on red thread in the window that faces the river because washers were what I could afford, and red was what my grandmother would have used to tell a thing. No. I chalked a circle on the threshold and then swept it carefully away because the book had said chalk remembers, and I wanted it to remember the act, not the geometry. The hollow didn't let me leave without rent. I don't mean a scar I can show you or a sleep I stopped having. I mean that once a week or twice, when the wind comes down from the ridge carrying the smell of pennies and rain, something in it says my name exactly the way my father said it on the day he taught me to drive. Gentle, patient, ready to catch. I don't answer then. I fold a dish towel in half and in half again and place it over the bathroom mirror, not because of any old stories, but because glass is persuasive and I am tired. I count my breaths to 13, the number of trees across from the funeral home, the steps to the river from our old porch, the reasons I can think of in a hurry for not giving up what I worked so hard to keep. Once, walking past the feed store, I saw a man bending to tie his shoe in the window. The man in the glass looked up before he did and showed me a mouth that wasn't his. I took a promise out of my pocket and held it up between me and any more mischief. The glass went back to being a window with dust and thumbprints and blue sky. The man finished his knot and stood and thanked me for holding the door, though I hadn't. Twice now I've woken to the sound of water running, the sink on, a skinny thread. Both times there were words written on the fog of the mirror, where a face would be if I were brave enough to look. Come back. Both times I wiped them away with the heel of my hand and said aloud, no, not loudly, not prayerfully, just like you say no to a dog that is about to learn a bad habit and will be better for not knowing it. When the moon is thin and me in the town locks its screens by accident, men sit on porches with their feet flat and their hands still. Women who have decided they'll never marry watch the edge of the trees and make soup that smells like saving. Kids who don't believe a word we say walk as far as the last mailbox and no farther, and we pretend not to see that a part of them believes more than is good for them. I know the cabin is still there. Sometimes I smell the iron of it under the moss. Sometimes I feel the shape of the carved circle in my palm when I pick up my keys. Sometimes, passing the ridge with the windows up, I catch a glint through trees that could be the face of a knife catching sun and could be nothing at all. I don't go back. I keep a nail and a length of red thread and the knife with the white scarring along its spine in the drawer by the stove. If guests ask what the iron washers in the window are for, I tell them they keep the glass from buzzing when trucks go by, and this is mostly true. If anyone says the gray hollow beast like they think it is a sound to bring to a fire pit, I get up and go make coffee and count to 13 while the kettle tries to be patient. On good nights, people, I love say my name and mean me. On bad nights, the hollow says it and means a door. On those nights, I say nothing, and the wind carries on downriver. Disappointed, and the pine needles remember their manners, and whatever is looking for a familiar mouth goes to the next town that has almost forgotten one of its buildings and will learn again not to. Now, on to the next story. I didn't believe the stories about the river until I saw the lights myself. Everyone in town had a version. They said if you drove the South Road by the water at night, you'd see lanterns bobbing on the current, sometimes red, sometimes white, sometimes blue, like a torch drowned too deep. Old men said they were the souls of miners who drowned in the floods of 22, forever looking for the path home. Teenagers swore they were UFOs, swamp gas, or headlights playing tricks. The church folk shook their heads and muttered about demons that mimicked light to lure you close. I thought it was folklore, the kind towns like ours needed to keep themselves interesting, until the night I followed them. It started simple. I was restless. The cabin I rented sat 2 miles off the river, with no neighbors except raccoons that knew how to raid trash bins. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't read. The night pressed heavy, so I got in my truck and drove. The road to the river was narrow, lined with leaning oaks that made the headlights crawl like nervous fingers. At the bend where the asphalt ran close to the water, I saw it, a pale blue light hovering just above the current, bobbing gently as if tied to a boat that wasn't there. I slowed, squinting. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't the moon. It pulsed softly, like it was breathing. Then another appeared 20 yards downriver, glowing red. Then another, white closer to the bank. I pulled over, killed the engine. The night swallowed the sound, leaving only the lapping of water and the drone of insects. The lights didn't waver. Something in me said go home. But another part, the part that's broken in people like me, said find out. I climbed down the embankment, gravel crunching under my boots. The first light, the pale blue one, drifted closer. It was the size of a lantern flame, but there was no smoke, no heat. I reached out. It darted back. Not fast, not natural, like it was teasing. Hello, I said, my own voice sounding foolish. The light pulsed once, then it moved further downstream, pausing as if waiting for me. I followed. The riverbank narrowed, brush grabbing my sleeves, mud sucking at my boots. The lights formed a path now, blue, red, white, red again, like breadcrumbs scattered on black water. Always just far enough to make me chase, never close enough to touch. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No frogs, no insects. Even the river seemed to hush. My chest tightened. My breath came loud in the silence. Then I saw her. She stood in the shallows 20 feet ahead, water lapping at her calves. A woman in a gray dress that clung to her body like it had been soaked for years. Her hair hung long and black, dripping into the current. Her face was pale, almost luminous, and her eyes burned like the lantern lights. The lights hovered around her now, orbiting her head like fireflies, too disciplined to scatter. I froze. She raised her hand, beckoning. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs moved forward, one step, then another, as if her gesture carried weight. The mud sucked deeper at my boots. The water reached my knees. Come closer, she whispered. Her voice wasn't carried by the night. It was inside my skull, intimate as breath. My mouth opened without my permission. Who are you? She tilted her head. The lights brightened. One who waits, one who was left. My feet kept moving. I was chest deep now, current tugging. The light swirled faster, dizzying. Her hands stretched toward me, and then I remembered what the old men had said. The lights are bait. Don't follow them, no matter what they promise. I slammed my eyes shut, dug my nails into my palms until the sting broke the trance. When I opened them again, the lights had multiplied, dozens, maybe hundreds, bobbing on the water, surrounding me in a ring of color. The woman's face twisted, not angry, but hungry. Her mouth opened, wider and wider, until it split her face in half. The lights poured toward me, searing bright, their glow filling my eyes until I couldn't see. I threw myself backward, half swimming, half stumbling. My hands clawed at mud, branches. Anything solid. Something brushed my ankle, slim fingers, cold as river stone. I kicked wildly, broke free, and scrambled up the bank on hands and knees. Behind me, the lights wailed. That's the only way I can describe it. Not sound, but pressure, a chorus of grief that pressed against my bones. Then silence. I didn't stop running until my truck was in sight. I tore the door open, fumbled the keys, and gunned the engine so hard, gravel spit from under the tires. The rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness. Back at the cabin, I bolted the door and sat shaking until dawn. I told no one who would believe me. In town, they just nod, the way people nod when they've heard another fool join the list of near misses. But I've noticed something since. Every night when the river is close, I see faint glimmers through the trees, not bright enough to mistake for lanterns, not loud enough to make me follow, just enough to remind me they're there. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear her voice, soft and patient. Not yet, but soon. Now, on to the next story. The first time I heard the station call a stop that doesn't exist, I thought I was mishearing my own voice. The graveyard shift in central control isn't glamorous. It's a room that smells like warm plastic and old coffee, half lit so the wall of monitors wears the city like a dim aquarium. I sit under a map that pulses with tiny lights, trains as fireflies, power blocks as bones. Between midnight and 5, it's mostly ballast, a few last runs rattling home, a lot of empty track, and in between the city's heartbeat, learning to keep quiet. Next stop, Marrow Street. Doors open on the left. I had just finished the 0210 slate of automated announcements. Delay on the blue, elevator out at East Market, mind the gap if you still believe in poetry. My finger hovered over the console touchpad, the way it does when you're done with a thing, but not ready to admit it. The speakers that run our internal feed murmured with the uninteresting sounds of a station at night. Hum, draft, a distant cough. Then that, my voice saying a name I've never recorded, for a stop our map has never carried. I pulled up the list of all scheduled stations, as if software could argue with what my ears had just taken in. The list is tidy. We have the stations we have. The ghosts live in the hallways, not in the database. A camera at platform 2 of Kingfisher flickered. The platform was empty, except for a man whose jacket made him look like a plastic bag caught on a fence. He turned toward the lens with the recognition of people who know cameras better than faces. The glass behind him showed his reflection, then something else, then only the tiled black. Next stop, Marrow Street, my voice said again, softer, as if a door had been closed between us. I unmuted the ops line. The dispatcher on duty yawned so hard we both felt it. "You hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" The room's vents answered, because vents always choose the wrong time to grow opinionated. I listened for my phantom again and got only the live feed from a blue line car, a lone pair of shoes on gray vinyl, 2 ad posters pretending to be cheerful, the driver's cab door shut and properly latched. "It's nothing," I said, and the dispatcher grunted in the language of people who love nothing. Later, at 3, a maintenance crew keyed up on the radio to say they were clear of the track by the old river tunnel. Someone made a joke about eels, someone else about urban legends. Laughter sounded like wrenches politely clinking. I signed them out of the block and watched the little rectangle on my map change color. Safe again. I noted the time in my log and the steady handwriting I learned after. I practiced being tidy because it gave me a way to survive what I couldn't control. At 3:17, a train icon butted at the edge of the map in a place no train should ever bud. We're not an old city, not in the European sense, but we've dug enough holes to pretend. There are tunnels we don't use. Some got flooded, some got walled off when the new line's curve didn't agree with the old. There are rooms under stations that appear on the original schematics as storage, and whose keys we don't carry anymore. There are tracks laid for promises that budgets never kept. The map in my head is two maps overlaid, the official one, with its colors and stops that council members can pronounce into ribbons, and the other, the one I started collecting the year my son disappeared, and no camera could say which door took him. The arriving icon bore a designator the system should never display, K0. We have no K line. Dispatch, I said evenly. What do you have near the old river tunnel? Nothing, he said, brisk now, awake in the way men get when something violates their idea of the world. Why? Glitch, I said. I dragged the cursor over the icon, and it offered me a speed, 11 miles per hour, a length, 6 cars. Power draw, wrong. It was pulling from a string of blocks we no longer fed. The system offered a route as if its feelings mattered. The route ran past 3 stations we don't staff anymore because no one lives on the river flats now, not since the 3rd flood. Past that, it made a sharp left where left is wall, and climbed toward the interlocking that separates green from orange. It did not slow. It flowed like water in a basement. Do you want me to call the cops? Dispatch asked, and I imagined uniformed officers in a room that smells like our room, staring at a bank of screens and practicing disbelief. Negative, I said, probably a logging error. I zoomed. The icon held steady, like an animal refusing to be shooed. Technicians can look in the morning. Next stop, Hickory Gate, my voice said on the internal feed, calm as a priest. Doors open on the right. We have no Hickory Gate. I switched to the driver to control line. No one called in. The rolling stock cameras showed the same thing over and over. A long night to nowhere. On camera 2, a woman slept with her mouth slightly open, clutching a paper bag that had the shape of dinner. On camera 4, someone had scratched a set of initials into the wall by the second seat from the door, the way teenagers do when they believe in future archaeologists. On camera 6, an ad for a mattress clung stubbornly to a frame that had been meant to hold real plastic, not 3 layers of overlapping tape. Call the interlocking, dispatch said. Tell them to go eyes on when the whatever it is reaches it. Copy, I said. Then, because there are chores that keep terror from finding your throat, I wrote a maintenance ticket for a flickering light at beach. I set the ventilation at Haviland to circulate once an hour, because sometimes the air is the problem people can't name. I ticked time forward a minute with my fingertip and watched the K0 get nearer to a place we control. In the corner of the room, under the map and its polite pulsing, sits a shelf of things lost. Not the big lost and found, that's at Central Station, open weekdays 10 to 4, guarded by a woman named Nisha, who remembers children by what they loved enough to misplace. This is the other lost, the things night people scoop from platforms and stairwells between trains, because sometimes objects scare the daylight crew, and sometimes the daylight crew scares the objects. A cracked pair of glasses, a scarf that smells like wet wool even when it's dry, a child's shoe with a Velcro strap that never quite learned to stick, a plastic ring, a toy phone. I pick things up. That's how my right hand stays busy when the left is counting minutes. The toy phone weighs almost nothing. It's meant for a toddler. Big buttons with pictures instead of numbers. A tiny speaker that chirps when you press the star. A face sticker rubbed half off. It has no battery compartment. It has never had one. Press the star and it chirps anyway. When the K0 reached the interlocking, the camera there showed what I expected and hated, nothing. Track, the red eyes of signal aspect as if it were holding its breath for an express that never runs at this hour. The wall beyond, stained in a certain way because water, like rumor, finds the same paths over and over. I toggled the light control for the next station in line. The station lights came up like a nervous laugh. The internal feed said, in my voice, next stop, Ashdown. Doors open on the left. Ashdown is on the map, but no train had asked permission to enter it. I pulled up the power monitor and watched the draw dip and surge like a heartbeat that doesn't understand itself. Interlocking control, a new voice crackled into my ear. This is not funny. Agreed, I said. Do you have any eyes inbound? A camera, she said. And Vic, who doesn't get paid enough to believe in ghosts. Dead air. Then, more softly, it's on the board but not on the rails. Can you put it in my hands? I knew what she meant. Sometimes the software uses old expectations to keep itself from crashing. Sometimes you can shepherd it better if you give it a place to land. I can clear the block if no movement detected. That's not what I asked, she said. I know, I said. Next stop, Marrow Street. My voice said, too calm to be true. Doors open on the left. I have a son. Had. Have. The grammar depends on the hour. He was 4 when he loved trains the way other boys love fire trucks. He pressed his palms to the windows at Central and named colors like spells. He would not sit on my lap if the bench had gum underneath, because he liked beginnings more than middles. On a Tuesday in March, the kind with rain that has forgotten what temperature is, he and his mother rode into the museum and back. On the way back, between stops, a door light tripped, and the driver held at a station not on their route. The records say that. The driver opened, closed, no incident. The cameras show nothing but a small boy's handprint, where glass is colder than air. When the train rolled into our station after, he wasn't on it anymore. We had his name on the news for 3 weeks. People messaged me with sympathy after it became clear that your name makes good paper for a month and bad paper for the rest of your life. My ex-wife moved to a city with fewer tunnels. I stayed here and learned how the map hums when it's trying to solve a problem it can't admit exists. Where would you like to receive it, I asked. The center pocket, interlocking control said, behind the school construction. If it exists, it'll hate that. Copy, I said, and told the map the lie it wanted. This is a train. I am clearing its way. The K0 took the path politely, like a man who tips badly but holds a door. Next stop, Hickory Gate, my voice said again. It made my teeth hurt. Doors open on the right. Dispatch breathed in my ear. You're not? No. I said I'm not. Then who? I don't know, I said, and let the unknown sit between us like a sleeping dog you refuse to step over. We're receiving 202. 202 shows your train clocking into a block. It didn't. The software does this when it can't tell you something directly, because it would break its own rules to do it. It flags, instead, the fact that time did not pass the way it thinks it should, which is the bravest thing a machine can do. Do you want me to kill power? Dispatch asked, and I imagined the city above me sighing as the neon goes thin. Hold, I said. If this was a malfunction, power cycling might bury it. If it wasn't, power cycling might invite it closer. There is a tone to these things, a little respect you learn to give stories that outlive the men who made them. On the Ashdown platform, the camera caught a blur at the far stair, a woman's coat maybe, the edge of a face, a bare knee, pale as a truth. She stopped when the station lights came up, turned as if she had been caught in her own kitchen at night. She held something small, the way a person carries a sandwich, or a kitten, or a phone. She was older than the last time I saw her. She is older than me now, in the pictures on the mantel. I closed my eyes and opened them again, because you are allowed that much magic in a room with a map. Next stop, Marrow Street. Doors open on the left. The K0 icon reached the pocket we had offered it. It paused. The camera showed only the pocket track's oil slick shine, as if someone had set a mirror face down. A breath caught in my throat in a way that did not respect my job. In the glass in front of me, the toy phone on the shelf lit, a star on plastic white, a glow with no battery to blame. I pressed it without meaning to. The chirp it made is for toddlers, a sound that exists in a world before uncertainty. The intercom fizzed. Not the internal feed. The system-wide, The voice you use when you need to tell the whole city something at once and expect it to obey. I had not keyed it. Doors opening, said my voice. On the Ashdown camera, every door on a train that wasn't there folded back. Passengers don't fall for magic the way movies tell you they do. They hedge. They test with a toe, a breath, a turned shoulder. A kid with a skateboard touched the air where a door would be if there were a train. A woman pulled her purse closer to her chest, turned away, and then turned back, as if fear's hand on her shoulder had become rude. Someone laughed. Someone else said God without meaning anything ecclesiastical by it. On camera 3 in the Blue Line train, I had been watching earlier. The sleeping woman stirred. She lifted her head, blinked, cursed a soft local curse. The ad for the mattress promised less insomnia if you settled your debt to foam. The child's faces on the ad looked like they were asleep, so they could sell to mothers. Doors closing, my voice said, kind as surgery. On the Ashdown platform, a small boy, 4, 5, ran between his mother's knees, the way my son used to when he wanted to turn a no into a yes, trusting entirely the hallway a body can make. He ran into the light and did not hit anything and vanished in the specific way you want to believe. No child can. His mother screamed, not a movie scream, the sound a person makes when the train leaves, with the part of you it never had permission to take. I stood. The chair rolled backward and banged the shelf. The toy phone slid and fell and didn't hit the ground. It hung in the air for an extra full second, like it was waiting for a hand to catch it from the other side. Then it dropped, light as a candy wrapper. Kill power, I said, and dispatch swore. Power cycling a system in motion takes a checklist longer than the time you spend on it. He threw 3 breakers anyway. The hum in the room changed pitch like a hive that just remembered it was bees. Lights on 2 stations hiccuped and came back sulky. My board went dark, then warm. On the Ashdown camera, the woman fell to her knees and slapped her palms on nothing and left warmth on air the way candles leave on photographs. You can't do that, the interlocking op said in the cool tone of someone who can't afford to cry. You can't take the whole city out on a hunch. It's not a hunch, I said, and the toy phone in my hand pressed the star by itself and chirped like a heart monitor. The K0 icon vanished. The software offered a balloon of text. Ghost train cleared, then swallowed it politely, as if to apologize for its joke. The monitors returned to their aquarium, empty tracks, the occasional janitor, a rat practicing stairs. Dispatch muttered about reports and reprimands, and he would cover for me, and please don't ever ask him to do that again. In the Ashdown feed, the woman's hands lifted from the perfect air and left 2 ghostly prints fading on nothing. She turned her head toward the camera. Her mouth shaped a name I know very well. The morning managers arrived at 6, smelling of clean shirts and the kind of sleep you earn by not knowing what night is like. I filled out 3 incident reports with words that made sense, then signed them with a hand that had not had a place to rest in hours. Someone brought donuts. Someone charted the power dip against a maintenance window and shrugged. The city above us stretched, checked its phone, and pretended to have dreamed nothing. At 9, after the commute, the woman from Ashdown came into central control. Not many people even know where we are. They pass under our rooms every day and never think about who pushes the announcements and turns the air and sends steel where steel must go. She had a face I had seen younger. She had been the kind of pretty that doesn't realize it, and now was simply true, in the way a person gets when she has buried enough people to stop asking why. She carried a paper bag that had once held a sandwich, or a kitten, or a phone. She didn't look at me. She set the bag on the counter and said to no one. He was holding my hand. Then she left, and the smell of wet wool followed her out. Inside the bag lay a child's shoe with a Velcro strap that would never quite learn to stick. The city is generous with its stories if you stay late. Over the next weeks, More voices came through the internal feed when they weren't supposed to, calling stops that don't exist in my tidy database. Hickory Gate again, a station called Unthank, a place called South March, that old maps list as a marsh. K0 rolled its impossible route 3 more times, always after 3, never at the top of the hour. We learned its habits and it learned ours. When it called doors, it wasn't only for the lost. Sometimes it took fear, sometimes it gave it back. Once a man put his palms to the space where a car should be and stepped backward as if something had nudged his knees. Once a dog bristled and then lay down, obedient to a whistle we couldn't hear. I do the brave thing now when it comes. I don't fight it with breakers, not unless someone is about to give the night what it cannot return. I open the right yards so it will hate them and pass. I light the wrong platforms so it will miss. I speak into my own microphone and fill the city with useless inventory, a clock that's 3 minutes slow, the names of bridges that don't exist anymore, smells the fans can't explain, so there is less room for the other voice to coil itself into the day. I never say my son's name out loud, not in the headphones, not in this room where the map loves names. Sometimes the toy phone lights by itself, and I put my palm over it, like you do a candle you mean to smother kindly. It warms my skin and pretends not to. Next stop, Marrow Street, my voice says on nights when I have not recorded anything, and somewhere under the river where the concrete sweats and paint remembers flood, a 6-car nothing rides along a track we didn't lay, carrying everyone it's owed. The city will tell you there is no K-line. The city is technically correct. The K-line is a habit the tunnels picked up from us, the way we want everything to be a line with stops and starts. But habits are real. They make routes with or without your permission. The night has its own signage. The walls have their own way of reading maps. If you hear my voice call a station you can't find, don't follow it. If something like a door opens where no train waits, take a step back and find a human hand to hold. If you have a child with fingers like stars, put their palms on windows you trust and teach them to say the names of colors like spells, but keep a hand on their shoulder when the train says there's a shortcut. And if you have lost something that answers when the internal feed says a stop you've never ridden to, do not come to the platform alone. Bring someone who believes in inventory. Bring a person who can list what's in their pockets without looking. Keys, receipt, a coin from a country they have never seen. Bring something small that makes a noise that doesn't need a battery. Hold it in your hand. When the impossible doors open and the air exhales like a tunnel, remembering wind, press that star and make a toddler's chirp. Sometimes the night will blink, annoyed, like a driver caught at yellow who chooses red. Sometimes the doors will close on nothing, and the K0 will carry on, stubborn as a rumor, and sometimes, rarely, you will hear a small familiar laugh, like tape left on a radiator, and you will be forgiven for the way your knees go out. On my shelf under the polite pulsing map sits a paper bag and a shoe with a Velcro strap. Next to it, the toy phone, its face sticker half rubbed away by someone's thumb. When the lights in the room choose to go thin and the tunnels gather their own breath, I put my hand on the phone and feel the heat that plastic can hold if you let it, and I say into the mic, for everyone and no one, doors closing. The room waits. The city holds its map like a promise it's not sure it can keep. And somewhere below, in the pocket behind the construction that made us safe, steel rolls where steel shouldn't, and a small voice I know counts stops I've never learned, certain that if he gets to the right one I'll be there, standing in a light that doesn't exist, offering my hand through air that remembers both of us. Now, on to the next story. There's a church on the hill with a saint who watches the town sleep. People say she's older than the church and younger than the hill. The hill came with the land. The church came with a donation, and the saint came with a story. They set her in a niche above the side door decades ago, plaster over wood, paint tempered by a steady hand, a robe the blue of laundry sitting in a basin, a mouth small and determined, and the first thing she did was look like someone you knew. Her glass eyes had a film over them when I was a kid, which made adults talk lower in her shadow. At dusk, she seemed to see more of you. At midnight, if you went close and everyone does once, you could make out what was trapped under the gloss. Tiny irregularities, bubbles like seeds, the old way of making eyes fixed on a single forever gaze. My grandmother kept a key to the sacristy and sometimes brought me along to fill candles on Friday afternoons. It smelled of cold stone, and wax behaved better there. I loved the small hush behind the side door that felt like an apology for the big hush in the nave. One late winter day, the kind of afternoon that looks like it wants to be snow and can't quite, my grandmother kept the door propped while she hauled a box in, and in the exact moment the door was neither open nor shut, I watched the saint blink. Just once, a small correction, like dust had landed and the eye had taken care of it. Gran, I said. Hmm? She was counting votives the way saints count promises, seat of the pants and exact. She blinked. She does, sometimes, my grandmother said, and when I stared, she added gently, "You'll learn not to check on purpose." I tried not to. It's hard for a child not to. Years later, after my grandmother, after time had made the niche need repainting, after the church's roof had forgotten its job and then relearned it, after I had moved away and come back and moved away again, and then came back for good, because towns do that to you. The saint's eyes were clearer. The glass had been cleaned by a restorer the parish had splurged for. The bubble glass was gone. New eyes, the kind that shine. It was only practical, Father Marco said when people complained that the new eyes made them nervous. Condensation gets behind the glaze. Mold. You want the Blessed Virgin with mold in her skull? She's not the Virgin, Mrs. Ansell said. She's Saint Dymphna, or Dorothea, or someone from the list we don't read. She knows our business. She doesn't need shine. Shine or not, she kept watch. The town had more cameras than saints now, but the saints saw the right things. She missed the loud fights and caught the quiet ones. She missed the tourist's photo and caught the 3 seconds after, when the tourist turned his phone away and looked at the hill like the hill had said his name. She missed the day we raised money for a new roof and caught the night a woman came to sit on the steps with a bag she did not open for a long time. I started sitting with the saint myself, the year my father forgot how doors work. I'd walk him after supper because appetite gets tired before legs do. When your mind misfiles your maps, we'd circle the block, go by the church, nod to the side door, check that the heavy key in my pocket existed, and say neutral things about weather and the dog 2 streets over that barks like a trumpet. He didn't like the knife. The big air made him look for exits he couldn't name. But he liked the side door. The saint was at face level if you stood on the last step. She's your height, he said once, and I, who had never liked being told I was short, found that I didn't mind from him, because the way he said it meant close enough to hear you. On a Wednesday that had nothing specific wrong with it, he pulled his hand from mine and reached toward her the way a man reaches to check if the iron is still hot. The saint didn't blink. That would have been too much like another kind of story. She did something smaller. She turned her head a fraction. The glass caught dusk, then didn't. Careful, I said, but I wasn't talking to him. I just wanted to see what color, he said, hungry for words that day. Are they brown or green? Blue, I said, and then realized I was wrong. No, they're the kind that change. He looked up at her the way a child looks at a shelf and decides to climb. She knows, he said, satisfied, and I wished not for the first time that religion were as simple as the sentences we put in our own mouths. That night I woke at 3:12 and heard, no, felt the shift in the house that says a parent's feet have found an inappropriate route. I checked his room, empty. The front door hadn't been locked because he hated the idea of locked anything. I found him on the church steps with his coat misbuttoned and his breath in the air like a small, honest cloud. The saint's eyes shone. The town lay below, lights like coins thrown into a fountain too full. What did she say? I asked, hushing myself, because asking is good and answering breaks something. She asked if I remembered the tune, he said, then laughed, then touched his head, then said, "It's a walk, isn't it?" It is. We walked home very slowly, so the tune would not get ahead of us. After he died, the saint was easier to look at. Grief can make you love statues, because they don't change except when they do. I brought candles to the side door and lit one in the little rack where the safe licks at quarters. I said, "For my father," in a voice that did not ask for a miracle. A miracle is a shortcut, and a house like ours needed a road. She looked past me. Of course she did. Saints look at the thing you didn't bring. I began to see other people standing on the steps with the same hungry look. A woman with a split lip, careful, fresh, holding a phone like it might bite. A man who wore a jacket that said another town and eyes that said this one. A kid with a backpack too light for homework, too heavy for running away. People came and told the saint their secrets without saying anything. That's the correct way to do it. When the rumor went around that the saint had been seen weeping at the side door, proper miracle whispered at markets. I shook my head. We are greedy for tears. The story arrived with details, witnesses, tissues waved like surrender flags, and still I said no. If she wept, it would not be public. It would not make anyone's faith bigger than their town. Still, I began to carry a handkerchief folded in my coat pocket, the good linen one, because my grandmother would have done it that way, and if the saint needed a plain square of clean white to choose, I could pretend that was something I could offer. One evening after the early mass, when the light in the nave remembers how to be gold, Father Marco asked if I could help carry boxes to the sacristy. He is older now, ladders, and he don't rhyme. We stood in that small hush where wax behaves and unwrapped a new set of beeswax pillars the bishop had sent because he felt guilt about something distant and expensive. "Do you think she blinks?" Father asked, not looking at me. "I know she does," I said. "I saw her as a child, and once again when my father was halfway out of the world." He nodded. "She's not Dymphna," he said, apropos of nothing except his own wrestling. The diocesan archivist found the original note from the donor. It says St. Lucia. "Eyes," I said, feeling slow and chastened. "Of course, she carries them on a plate, if you remember your gory holy cards," he said wryly. "She leaves the better ones where they're needed." We stood a moment. "Do you think that's why she watches the town?" I asked. "To take and give?" "Everyone's always taking and giving with saints," he said, kind and tired. "Perhaps she just watches so that someone is watching." There was a sound from the side door. Not the hinges, the quiet shifting of someone who has made a decision at last. Father and I glanced at each other and did not move, because the right kindness is to let some decisions be witnessed without help. Footsteps came and went. The door breathed and settled. The saint kept her eyes on the hill. It was the handkerchief that did it, in the end. A week later, wind sharp enough to strip paint from breath, I found a scrap of white cloth folded precisely on the bottom step, not damp though the stone was wet around it. My hand knew it before my head did. Not mine. The linen was older and finer. The stitches on the edges were hands' work, not machines. In the center, the cloth bulged a little, as if it held a coin. I unfolded it, stupid, reverent. A small glass bead rolled into my palm, rounder than the saint's eyes, mottled with tiny bubbles like seeds in jam. I looked up. She watched. It isn't an I told myself aloud, because language keeps doors between things. It wasn't, not anatomically, but I knew what it meant when it was mine for a moment. Someone had come in the night with a need, and the saint had made a trade in symbols. Here is vision, leave me your fear. Here is clarity, leave me your lie. Here is the ability to look and not forget. Leave me the part of you that wants to. I wrapped the bead back in the linen and tucked it into the niche below her hands, where small offerings rest. The note folded like an airplane, the ring left like a relief, the dried bouquet that sticks around out of loyalty. Find who it's for, I said, ridiculous, and walked home with my hands in my pockets so I wouldn't touch my eyes by accident. News ran through town, not as gossip, but as startled gratitude. A girl who had fallen had the courage to say she had. A man who had been caught in his lie told it himself and then told it again until it felt like a story he was done with. A neighbor who'd gone quiet after the hospital returned with jokes only one person laughed at, and that was enough. No one said the saint did it. The saint keeps watch. People do things. One night late, I woke to the feeling that someone was standing at the bottom of my bed. It was the old fear. I am not immune. I lay there and named furniture until the feeling passed. In the morning, on my kitchen table, lay my grandmother's handkerchief, the one I carry, not the saint's, folded precisely, a small bulge at its center. No, I said to the air, smiling and not. I don't need to see more. I need to look longer. I unfolded it anyway. In the center lay nothing. The bulge was made by a fold I had not unmade in years. The cloth smelled faintly of stone. At dusk, I took my empty handkerchief to the side door and tucked it into the niche. The saint's eyes shone the way clear glass shines. She looked at the hill. The town breathed. The bell's electric now, a recorded chime, told the hour once and no one minded. If you come by the church, ours or yours, don't look for tears. Look for the small corrections, the blink that knocks dust off a gaze, the fraction of a head turn that says, I see the thing you didn't bring. Bring a clean square of cloth anyway. Bring a promise to look longer and not louder. Bring a secret and the ability to keep it until keeping hurts. Saints are doors we set in walls because we forget how to open sky. Sometimes they hand us a key that isn't a key, and we pretend to understand because pretending keeps our feet where the stone is good. If she looks at you, don't ask for anything first. Say what my father said, happy as a child. It's a walk, isn't it? And then take one around the block and around again until the hill and the town and the glass-eyed saint all agree that tonight at least you have been seen. Now, on to the next story. The first time I heard the song, I thought it was the wind doing what wind does in places that have been emptied of purpose. The old quarry, everyone in town called the Hollow, had been shut for decades, a bite taken out of the hill and never chewed. I camped there because I was cheap, tired, and too proud to admit the motel's flickering vacancy sign made me nervous in a different way. By day, the Hollow looked like ruin with a view. Rusted cables drooped in lazy parabolas. A shattered conveyor belt lay like a peeled road. The pit itself dropped in terraces of stone, the color of old teeth, every ledge filigreed with scrub that had no interest in my opinion. By night, the edges lost their lines. The dark poured down and held still. I ate from a can, read by headlamp, until the words turned into ants, and slept hard enough to forget there was anything to be afraid of. Sometime near midnight, I woke because a voice was humming, not close, not far, the way a refrigerator hums felt before it's heard. It threaded the air with a tune more shape than melody, like the tale of a lullaby after the words fall off. I lay very still and listened to the tent fabric do its small shivers. The hum bent upward and down, then paused on a note that tasted like cold metal. I unzipped the flap an inch. Moonlight lay on the quarry floor in pale ribs. The wind moved in careful hands. Down in the pit, fog had gathered, where there had been no fog when I went to sleep. It was not rolling or rising, it was waiting. The tune changed. It tried my name. Not a perfect pronunciation, just the outline of it, like a stranger who has read it once and risks it anyway. My skin lifted as if a temperature had dropped inside me, that the air would get around to later. I closed the flap and told myself that sleep folds strange sounds into the shape of whatever you fear most. The second night, in a motel 20 miles away, the vent above the bed hummed the same melody. A woman's voice, high and even, like a mother who has rehearsed calm. When she reached the place where the note bent down, the vent breathed my name correctly. The TV volume didn't help, neither did running the sink. In the morning, I put my coffee down untouched and asked the waitress if anyone had ever complained about a noise from the hollow. She went still, in the kind of way you see around grief. "Don't go back," she said, not unkindly. I wasn't planning to. She looked at me the way my 5th-grade teacher did when I said I hadn't eaten the paste. It remembers who listens. The third night, I sat where the pit's lip turned to shale, and the wind had to decide whether to go on or circle back. Fog moved below, as if someone were stirring something heavy with a spoon too long. The song began as if it had been playing and only now decided to include me, soft, patient, expectant. When it tried my name, it didn't try. It knew. "What do you want?" I asked, because questions buy time. The fog took on the suggestion of bodies, thin as pencil lines. Dozens, maybe more. They swayed gently, like reeds that have learned sorrow. The humming multiplied, harmonies arriving and leaving with the unison of a tide. The tune was older than the quarry and younger than the rock. "Come down," said my own voice from inside the song. Not an echo, a perfect mimicry. I stood. I didn't mean to. The body answers music with movement. Gravel shifted under my boots. The descent toward the service road suddenly looked reasonable, like stairs you just hadn't seen before. I took one step because one step is how falling introduces itself. A beam of white light slashed the fog. A truck's horn startled the hill. The foreman of the road crew, who'd been regrading the county line, leaned out his window, face creased with a kind of anger that has fear woven in. "Not tonight," he called, as if he knew the schedule. I blinked. The shapes below softened back into fog. The song dropped to a hum that felt like a room clearing its throat. "Not tonight," I said back, to the pit or myself. I went home by a route my GPS didn't recognize until it did. After that, it stopped being nightly. It started being everywhere. A kettle reached a boil in my apartment and held the note too long. The elevator in my building found a frequency I hated. A woman on the train hummed under her breath, a melody that made me stand between cars for the rest of the ride. No matter where I went, the same cadence threaded the day. Up, down, hold, my name, a plea that wore politeness like clothes. I avoided sleep and then wanted it desperately. I smiled too wide while people talked. I began to look at storm drains as if they were mouths. The voice in the vent grew bolder. I taped a towel over it, and it hummed through cotton. I put my head under a shower, and it built itself from the water. I asked the town historian, because historians sometimes say the wrong thing and save your life. He used words like script and company store and accident, then shifted to softer ones: collapse, widows, unrecovered. He said the pit had a second dig in the 20s, quiet, off the books, below the level where the ledge had broken years earlier. He said they'd chased a vein past where the engineers would sign, and the tunnels got narrow, and the men got small in the dark. He said the company moved the fence and the map and a line item, and then moved away. He said no one ever heard rocks landing when they threw them in to test the depth. He lowered his voice like I might know someone who had never climbed back out. On his desk lay a ledger of names in 2 columns, shifts and Sundays. Pencil thin, some scored, some entirely erased, some smudged like someone had rubbed them and then stopped. He let me read until my eyes blurred. Beside the list, he'd written a single sentence. What sings down there isn't grief alone. What else? I asked. Hunger, he said, and then he crossed it out with one line, so he could still read it. I stopped going to work. I stopped telling anyone I wasn't. Sleep slid out from under me. I found myself standing by the sink at 4 a.m., holding a glass as if I had always held it. The tune had become a presence that didn't need sound. I heard it in my molars. I felt it in my wrists. My body tuned itself to a pitch the world didn't share. The fourth night on the rim, I brought earplugs, then didn't put them in because I was honest enough to know they only stop air. The fog below had thinned into columns, like pillars in an old nave. It was quiet, too quiet, the held breath silence of a stage before the actor walks on. I said, "What happens if I do?" The song answered by adding a second voice, low and familiar. My father's from the kitchen at 2 a.m. after the funeral. He hummed when he washed the last dish. He hummed when he couldn't say my name without breaking it. He hummed the same rise and fall, not because he'd known it then, but because the hollow did now, and lent it to him retroactively, because time makes poor fences once you agree to it. Rage is a good rope. I grabbed it. You don't get to use him, I said, and the fog pulsed as if insulted, then smoothed, then brightened faintly from within. A shape resolved near the bottom of the shaft. Small. A child, hand to mouth, shushing me. Above her, a woman swayed with a bundle in her arms that might have been water, might have been a blanket, might have been a baby. Around them, lines of men in canvas coats leaned on tools. They were still as photographs, and yet they were moving, a posture learned when a voice is near you. Want to honor. What are you? I asked. The answer reached my chest without touching my ears. Not one, many, not dead, not only. Do you want me? We want what listens. Why me? You stayed. I did. Not at the rim. I'd run. But everywhere else, in the vent, at the sink, on trains, in doorways, I had made space for the song in hours where memory should live. What happens if I go down? The child raised both hands in a pantomime of lifting. The hummed melody found a note halfway between welcome and warning. The fog took on the suggestion of walls. The pit felt narrower. Say I did, I said, bitter now. Say I step, say I slip, say you sing me into a path I can't see, and I crawl on my knees so my hands can learn the turns by how the stone jogs at the seam. Say I reach you. What then? The song softened around my name in a way that hurt. Stay. And if I don't, we will sing from where you sleep. Thunder rolled far off, not from clouds, but from the spine of the hill. A rock loosened and fell. It took a long time to become smaller. I didn't hear it land. The road foreman found me crouched by the pit at dawn and squatted the way men do when they would like to offer you dignity. He lit a cigarette and let it burn in his hand. My grandfather, he said, after the silence had become something you could stand on, is just fait shift. Long time ago, the old men still spit when they say it. He came home with white in his hair and red in his eyes. He woke up nights and said there was a fine sound under his feet, sweeter than a fiddle, and if he could only get back to it, he would be righteous in the morning. What happened? Nothing for a while, which was the problem. He was no good at anything but being near the edge. Then one June he walked back. Folks watched him go and practiced the story of how they tried to stop him. He didn't fall. The foreman pinched ash into a small, neat pile on the gravel. Not exactly. What do you do when you hear it? I asked. Pour coffee, he said. Walk away from anything that rhymes. Don't hum to yourself, not even happy. A song's a hook looking for a jaw. I laughed, then cried, which are the same motion with different names. I think it likes me. It does, he said kindly and without comfort. It likes everyone it can make a chord from. For days I practiced forgetting. I slept with a loud fan. I left the TV on an infomercial at volume 3. I practiced speaking aloud to my plants in ways that did not sound like a tune. When the vent sighed, I put on rain sounds and refused to notice if they found a key. I walked city blocks that had corners. I stood in crowded places and let other people's noises press in. The song learned my schedule and went looking for paces I had not worn yet. It found the laundromat at 3 a.m., where machines do a kind of whale song if you let them. It found a stairwell that multiplied footsteps. It found the second stall in the bathroom at work, where a crack in the tile made a reed sound when the door closed. It is hard to unteach your ears. It is harder to take the voice in your head that says this is for you, and tell it, not tonight, and then not tomorrow, and then not again until tomorrow grows a rind. The last time I went to the hollow, the air over the pit was very clear, the way air gets after a storm chooses elsewhere. No fog, no suggestion of bodies, no sound. The quiet was bigger than my name. I sat and hung my legs over the drop like an idiot at a swimming hole. I spoke in prose. I recited recipes. I said the alphabet in threes. I told the quarry the names of my teachers in order. I told it the worst and smallest things I'd done, the petty meannesses that collect like grit in the bends of a life. I did not sing. At sunset, when the sky went bruise-colored and the first bat practiced the shape of a turn, a note rose from below like a hand. It was wrong, half by a hair. I didn't look down. I stood and stepped back, and then back again. I didn't run, because running is a rhythm, and rhythms are roads. I moved to a place with traffic and bad saxophone on subways, and neighbors who play two-note doorbells. I kept my windows open so the street could fill me. I learned other sounds. I hummed nothing. I listened to talk radio, to sports, to my idiot upstairs neighbor who screams laughing at 2 a.m. My father's voice stayed where it belongs now, on the other end of a saved voicemail I won't delete. When the kettle catches a certain pitch, I lift it off, let it cool, and set it back down sideways so it will remember to be water. Sometimes, in the middle of a crowded day, a truck backing up will hit the interval just right, and my mind will walk to the edge. Sometimes I wake and hear the vent breathe one note too long, and I put my palm flat to the wall and tell it a list of groceries until the list runs out of tune. Sometimes I hear my name from a mouth in a room I'm not in, and I say, not tonight. The hollow is a place where stone remembers a choir. It is also a habit in the body. It will be, forever, one of the ways I could end. I think of the child who raised her hands. I think of the foreman's grandfather, righteous in the morning he never reached. If you camp near a pit people call by a proper noun, be suspicious of your bargains. If a song finds you, give it a shape with a door and get out of the room. Do not go to vents. Do not test wells. Do not practice humming. When it uses your father's voice, don't answer. When it learns yours, teach it boredom. When the wind is only wind, thank it aloud, badly and flat. Make your voice a dull instrument. Hang on to ugly noise. Stay where corners keep their promises. And if you ever stand at the lip of a perfectly quiet hole, and it calls you by name, say what the road crew says. Not tonight. Say it until the hill forgets you. Then go home by a way you have to count. Now, on to the next story. The phone booth had been dead for years. The glass panes were fogged with the kind of grime that only time applies. Each rectangle, a small gray aquarium for moths and dust. It sat on the corner by the old post office, a relic left standing out of habit, the way a town leaves a statue up when no one remembers who it is. It started ringing on a Tuesday. Noon, everyone heard it. The sound cut through traffic like a thin blade. Not loud, exactly insistent. The first ring stopped the mailman in his tracks. The second made Mrs. Kivett drop her grocery bag. Eggs broke in slow motion. By the third, the whole block had turned to look at the booth that hadn't called anyone in a decade. No one moved to answer. It's amazing how quickly adults remember being children when a dare is implied. It stopped after 7 rings. It started again at dusk. 7, again at midnight. 7. The mayor called the phone company, and a man came with a tool belt and a shrug, and declared that nothing was connected to anything. The cord inside the booth wasn't plugged into the ground. The wires in the street were bones. On the second day, a teenager answered, because teenagers are who we send to speak to the future. He pushed the folding door in, grimaced at the smell, and lifted the receiver with 2 fingers, the way you lift a dead thing that still might surprise you. Hello? He listened. His face went blank, then thoughtful, then frightened in the small way you can hide if you've practiced on mirrors. Yeah, he said after a long time. I remember. He hung up and walked home like rain had started, and he didn't want anyone to see him getting wet. No one could make him say who it was. Not his mother, not his friends, not the pastor who mistook curiosity for care. He changed his route to school to avoid the corner. On the third day, the booth rang at 7 minutes past 7 in the morning. Mr. Rosario, who has not been late to the hardware store in 30 years, stepped inside and picked up. Hola, he said cautiously. He listened. He said nothing else for a very long while. Tears rolled down his face into his mustache. He laughed once, the bad the kind you make when you want to be polite to a pain that is visiting. When he hung up, he placed his forehead against the glass pane as if it were a cool hand. It was my mother. He told no one and everyone. She asked where I put her red scarf. She was always losing it. His mother has been dead since I was a child. After that, answering became a ritual. Not everyone did it. Some kept a wide berth, as if the booth were a stray dog that might bite. Others waited for the ring like church bells, hoping their name was in its mouth. It always rang 7 times, and if you weren't inside by the 6th, the door would stick on the 7th in a way that felt personal. It never called the same person twice. When it rang for me, the light was doing that late afternoon trick where it turns polite. I was walking home with a bag of flour and a lemon because pie is a spell you can cast on a house to make it remember happiness. The first ring reached into my chest and plucked the string that runs from childhood to the place where I store things I mean to forgive myself for someday. The second ring made me cross the street. By the third, I was at the door. By the fourth, I was inside, smelling the booth's old breath. I lifted the receiver on the 5th and said the thing you say when you don't know who you're about to be. Hello? A pause that wasn't silence. Air moving in a room I couldn't see. Hey kid, said my brother. He has been dead 5 years. The sound of his voice was a chair pushed back from a table, footsteps in a hallway you know by heart. I sat without meaning to. The booth did not have a chair. I just found myself lower, knees aching pleasantly. Where are you? I asked because grief trains you to ask useless questions. He laughed the old way, a little higher on the tail, as if gladness were something you could temper. Wrong end of the line, he said, but the line is thin tonight. I closed my eyes. The lemon in my bag pressed a small sun into my thigh. What's it like? I asked because people do. Like taking off boots you wore too long, he said. Like remembering a name took too much effort, and now you don't need names. Like walking in a house without corners. I put my head against the glass, against the town, against the day trying to be ordinary. Why the phone, I asked. The living need doors, he said gently. We don't, but we remember how to knock. We talked the way people talk in kitchens at the ends of parties. When the good plates are stacked, and the last song on the playlist has been replayed 3 times, because no one wants to go home. He asked about our father's stubborn knee. I asked about the dog that carried his shoe for a week after the funeral. He apologized for the last fight over nothing. I apologized for not calling back the day before the accident, as if the day before any accident were a place you could live indefinitely if you bought the right map. How long? I asked when the booth's air changed. A subtle thing like weather rearranging its furniture. 7 minutes, he said. The line learns you, and then it forgets you. That's its kindness. What do you need? I asked because love likes errands. He thought, or seemed to. Perhaps he wanted to comfort me with the shape of thinking. Hide the red scarf, he said, and laughed when I made the confused sound he must have expected. Sorry, not yours. I'm borrowing someone's ending. He shifted, and I heard the sound of a chair in a room I will never see. Live where your kindness doesn't exhaust you, he said. Stop answering numbers you don't recognize unless you want to. Lock the door to the room that hurts and open it once a year with cake. I don't bake enough, I said. You're holding flour and a lemon, he said, and I could see him grin even with my eyes shut. You're doing fine. The line thinned. I felt it in the bones of the booth. I have to go, he said, and the words didn't wound. They just were. Answer for someone else if you can, he added. Sometimes the number's wrong. The click when he left the line was small and decent. The receiver was heavier when it held no one. I stepped out into a town that looked exactly the same, and wasn't. The mailman waved. The mayor pretended this wasn't happening. A child pressed both hands to the glass and left perfect prints. The booth rang for months. The stories braided themselves through the town's days. A widow spoke to a daughter who had never lived to turn 12. A gambler refused to pick up and then ran 4 blocks on the 7th ring and found the door stuck and wept in a way that made forgiveness feel like a thing the air could do. The pastor answered once and said nothing after, which is how I knew the call was for him and not for his congregation. One night it rang, and no one was near. The sound bounced off the post office, off the closed bakery, off the statue whose name we'd forgotten. I ran because pie crust can wait, and grief has never been patient. I pulled the door, lifted the receiver, and said hello to buy time. A woman spoke, a voice I didn't know. She said a name that wasn't mine, syllables soft as a lullaby. I told her she had the wrong number. She laughed like turning a page. No, she said, just the wrong hands. And then she asked, is he there? The boy with the blue jacket and the bad haircut? I looked up. Across the square, a kid in a blue jacket hovered, halfway between leaving and staying. He'd been circling the booth for days, waiting for the ring to forgive him for not being brave. I waved him in. He frowned, wary. It's for you, I mouthed. He came, shoulders hunched against a weather that wasn't weather, and I handed him the receiver, the way you hand a bride a bouquet, and hope she remembers what hands were for. He said, Mom, and folded up like paper. After that, I started going on the hour, not because I wanted another call. My brother's 7 minutes were sufficient for a lifetime, but because the booth had become for our town a hinge. We gathered near it the way people gather near fires they pretend are incidental. We kept a list, not of who had answered, but of who shouldn't have to do it alone. Teenagers, Mr. Rosario, the woman who sells shoes but never tries them on. When the phone company finally sent a crew to remove the booth, complaints from up the chain about liability and vandalism and the threat of rust, the mayor signed the order and then pretended he hadn't. The crew came with wrenches and a truck. The first man touched the door and stepped back with tears in his eyes. The second man made a call from his cell to no one and cried too. They left the booth standing. Paperwork got lost. Rust was patient. The town was more so. It rings less now. The line, I think, has learned our names the way old songs do and doesn't need to practice as much. When it does ring, Someone answers. Sometimes it's for the air and not for the hand, and we hang up gently. Sometimes it's for the wrong person, and we pass the receiver until the voice on the other end sighs, relieved, and begins. If you hear it, don't be afraid of the glass or the grime or the way your reflection looks like someone you owe. Step inside, close the little door behind you. Say hello like you mean it, because you do. Don't ask too many questions. Let the voice choose the shape of the 7 minutes. When it's time to go, you'll hear it in the line and in your ribs. And when you hang up, go buy flour and a lemon. Bake a pie for the room that hurts. Lock it and visit once a year with cake and a fork. Answer if it rings for someone else and you're the one standing nearest. We keep each other's calls when we can. That, more than anything, is what makes a town. Now, on to the next story. The first time I heard the question, it wasn't a voice. It was a red window blooming on my laptop screen, square and flat and strangely glossy, as if the color were still wet. Do you like the red room? I closed the lid without thinking. The question stayed behind my eyes the way bright lights do. I told myself it was a pop-up, a prank, some buried file that launched when a certain key combo got brushed by accident. The mind makes up simple answers when you ask it gently enough. That night, the apartment held still. I brushed my teeth with the bathroom door ajar and told myself I wasn't listening for anything. The mirror flickered. Only the cheap light, I said, and the water ran red for the briefest second before clearing. I went to bed. I slept. In the morning, the laptop woke to the lock screen as usual. No red window, no question. Work slid over the hours. I answered emails, paced my calls, pretended the stale coffee was a choice. By evening, I was almost myself again. I cued a video, let it play while I cooked something simple, and when the steam fogged the kitchen window, a square of red appeared in the glass, crisp and perfect, floating behind my reflection. Do you like the red room? The words weren't written, they were implied. The edges of the red making the letters by not being there, like a stencil on the inside of my own sight. I turned, but there was only the oven door, the clock, the sink. The window looked out on the alley. Nobody stood there. No glow from any other building painted that color across the glass. I wiped it with a towel. The square smeared, then bled, then was gone, leaving my reflection pale and thinner than it should have been, as if the red had taken weight with it when it left. I didn't tell anyone. How do you describe a question that asks itself? The third time, it arrived as a whisper in a quiet that didn't feel like mine. I had stayed late at the office to avoid the apartment, and the way the hall lights clicked too long before the bulbs caught. The building emptied. The elevators began their after-hours sighing. I was writing something I didn't care about when the screen blushed red from the center out, like a drop of dye finding the shape of water. The question typed itself in a font I don't own. Do you like the red room? My cursor blinked helplessly. The red window didn't block my work. It sat inside it, as if my document were the one trespassing. I moved the mouse and watched it stutter, sluggish, as if the air had thickened. Then, in the corner of the red, a small black dot appeared, and grew, and cleared into a camera lens. I saw myself as if from across a room. The camera on my laptop was off. The tiny green LED slept. But there I was, faintly delayed, hands hovering above the keyboard, breath shallow. Behind me, the office stretched out in parallel lines, desks, chairs, tall windows that became mirrors at night. In the reflection of the farthest window, a square of red hung where no screen should be. Do you like the red room? No, I typed. I don't. The words dissolved into the red like sugar vanishing in tea. The camera view pulsed once, twice, then slowed until the image froze. My own frozen face looked back at me with a little skepticism, as if I had said the wrong thing. When the red finally receded, it did so by degrees, as if a hand were pulling it away from inside the glass. I shut down. I went home. I left the laptop on the kitchen table like an animal asleep in the sun and lay on the couch with every light on. The hallway bulb outside buzzed in a way that made the silence inside feel crowded. Past midnight, my phone buzzed against my hip, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail because the unknown is easier if you give it a box. The notification popped up. I pressed play, telling myself if it was a scammer, I'd be angry. Anger is a railing you can hold in the dark, static. Then a small, curious voice, close to the microphone in the way that means the room behind it is very large. Do you like the red room? I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Same number. I pressed decline. It rang again, again. I turned it off and set it face down. From the kitchen table, the laptop chimed the sound it makes when someone starts a video call. The lid was closed. The chime happened again and again. I stood very still and waited for my breathing to match the room. No, I said aloud, though nobody had asked. I don't like it. The apartment swallowed the word like a mouth that doesn't intend to chew. When sleep came, it did so sideways, like a car sliding into a space too small. I woke to a knock, 3 precise taps at the door, as if whoever stood there had been taught manners a very long time ago and nothing else. The peephole showed me a slice of hallway, the opposite wall, the exit sign bleeding its red into the dim. No one stood outside. Still, the air held the shape of a presence that had recently left and might be waiting only for me to stop looking. In the morning, my laptop lid had shifted a fraction, as if a careful hand had considered lifting it and stopped out of politeness. The screen woke on its own when I passed. The red window blossomed without preamble. Do you like the red room? I nodded. I don't know why. Maybe acquiescence buys time. Maybe saying yes to a question does not mean yes to the consequences. I nodded and said, very quietly, yes. This time, the red did not recede. It deepened, a color you could step into if you forgot yourself for a moment. Words scrolled up from the bottom of the square, the way credits roll, white on red, names of rooms written as if rooms could be titled like songs. The waiting room, the listening room, the room where you learn not to turn around. Each title had a small thumbnail, just a darker shade in a different corner, so that if you stood back, the whole looked like a tiled wall, 100 doors pretending to be a single one. The cursor slid without my hand. It hovered over the red room. Not a title, a destination. When it clicked, the sound it made was not electronic. It sounded like a fingernail against wood. The camera view opened again. Whatever lens looked back at me sat farther away now, as if the room had backed up and taken the walls with it. I saw myself seated at the kitchen table, the cheap overhead light making a circle on the laminate, the laptop at the circle's center, like an altar someone had built while meaning well and not understanding anything. Behind me, the hallway stood open, longer than my hallway is, lined with doors that were not mine. Red seeped from under each door in a thin ribbon and ran toward the table as if it knew the way. I turned in my chair to prove that the view was a trick. The hallway behind me was the hallway behind me, short, ordinary, the closet door slightly ajar, the coat sleeves visible like tired flags. When I turned back to the screen, the long hall remained, patient and disinterested in my corrections. A door opened somewhere I could not place, not in the apartment. I know the sound of my own doors. This sound was older. It contained the weight of paint over paint, of secrets dried into the grain. Footsteps followed, soft as someone walking barefoot over remembered carpet. They came from the screen. They moved toward me from inside the red. Who are you? I asked because no answer is the same shape twice. The footsteps stopped. A shadow formed at the edge of the camera view, very tall and very thin, as if a person had been stretched to fit a frame too narrow for anything human. When it leaned, the red brightened. I felt heat on my face as if I were close to a fire that has been burning in the same hearth since the house was younger than its foundations. The voice was close to my ear and also very far away, like something spoken down a speaking tube between floors. Do you like the red room? Yes, I said, because the truth was irrelevant and manners mattered to whatever this was, and because the word yes keeps you moving in a conversation that wants you to stop. The red unfolded. The kitchen disappeared and remained. Both. I was still at my table and also standing in a room with no corners. The walls curved in on themselves the way an eye sees the inside of itself if it forgets to blink. The red had depth without distance. I tried to judge its size and lost count of edges. The only furniture was a chair, exactly like mine, placed at the exact distance you place a chair if you want a person to sit without asking permission. On the chair lay a small white card with black writing in a hand that understood both patience and hurry. Sit. I did. The chair was my chair. The red breathed. The card turned itself over and became a second card with a second word in the same hand. Confess. I don't have anything, I said. I'm ordinary. The red deepened. A third card appeared on the table where my laptop should have been. Confess. To what? To whom? My mouth worked. The first thing that came was something small, the kind of sin dull enough to pass the time in a stranger's ear. I don't answer calls from unknown numbers, I said, even when I know it might be someone I love. The red accepted this like a teacher taking a paper with a name spelled right, and nothing else correct. The next card was not written in the same hand. The letters were broader, unfamiliar. A different person's confession borrowed my voice. I keep a list of every time I should have said I'm sorry and didn't. The red listened. Time moved as if it were waiting. I confessed more. Nothing dramatic. Not the big things you tell when you want to be forgiven like a saint. Small things that bruise real lives. I forgot my father's birthday because I didn't want to think about the year he had. I held a friend's secret too long and let it rot. I saw a stranger crying on a bus and looked away because kindness is exhausting when you haven't eaten. Each confession warmed the room, and the warmth felt like relief until it passed a point and became something else. The red began to smell faintly of iron. I wiped my palms on my jeans, and they came away clean, and not. Red does that. It paints what it wants without proof. How long? I asked. How long do I sit? The chair behind mine scraped, not against my floor, but against a floor that echoed inside the red. A weight sat down with no body to carry it. The presence leaned forward until it nearly touched the back of my throat. When it spoke, it used my voice from a time before I learned to close doors. Do you like the red room? I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I don't know. I said yes, because there is a way to leave a conversation by staying in it, and I did not know any other way out. The room exhaled. The red thinned, then thickened again, like blood clotting and breaking and clotting. The chair across from me was no longer empty. A girl sat there, 14 maybe, hair blunt cut at her jaw, eyes too dry for the story they wanted to tell. She wore a white uniform shirt, the kind that makes 100 students into a single shape, and the collar was stained red in the neat starburst pattern you get when you try very hard to keep something from spreading and fail. She looked not at me but at the space between us, as if the red had put something there that was for her. When she spoke, it was with the careful articulation of the newly dead. I clicked it, she said, like a fool. I said yes because I thought it was a joke, and then because I thought it was a dare, and then because I thought I could win. She raised her hands. The palms were clean, the backs were not. She smiled in a way that was no longer made of habits learned in a mirror. They turned my room red, she said, but not all at once. First the corners, then the threshold, then the inside of me. I breathed too shallowly and saw small white sparks at the edges of my sight. Who turned it? She tilted her head as if I had mispronounced the only word that mattered. The room did, she said. It likes to be liked. Behind her, the red gathered itself like a muscle. A door appeared where there had not been a door, or perhaps had always been a door if you knew how to see doors that are not for you. Someone stood in the doorway, tall, long coat that had once been black if red did not exist. A hand held the door, the way a hand holds a promise it intends to keep, whether you asked for it or not. The face did not belong to any person, not because it was monstrous, but because it was perfectly polite, the sort of face that never gets noticed until it never forgets you. Don't turn around, the girl said, and her voice sharpened for the first time. Listen to me. Do not turn around. If you look, it likes you more. The presence behind my chair leaned closer, as if I had invited it by acknowledging it. The smell of iron strengthened. The red around the corners of the room pulsed in time with my heart, and my heart began to listen to it, the way a foot falls into step with a drum on a road. Some rooms are hungry, the girl said. They eat with their eyes. How do I leave? My voice was very small and very far away. The red blurred its edges and then brought them back, impatient. You don't, she said, and then she smiled in the way the living smile when a joke lands exactly between them. You pretend you already did, and sometimes the room is distracted by someone else pretending harder. She stood. I had not seen her stand, and yet she was standing. The door behind her opened wider, and the tall figure in the coat did not move, which is still a way of moving in rooms like this. She placed her palm on the table between us. It left no mark, and also left one that would be there if I thought about it too long. Confess the biggest small thing, she said, not the worst, the truest. Give the room a shape of you that it can keep while you carry the rest. I closed my eyes. The presence behind me tilted its head. I felt it without any sense that calls itself by name. When I spoke, it was not a decision. It was gravity. I hurt someone who loved me because I wanted proof they would stay, I said, and when they stayed, I was angry because the proof was ugly. The red stilled. The chair behind me leaned away. The girl nodded in a way that contained the space between pity and respect. Now say you like it, she said softly. Say it like you mean it enough for it to be bored of you. Some courtesies are camouflage. I kept my eyes closed. I like the red room, I said, and found to my horror and my safety that I meant it while I said it. I like the red room. The door closed without sound. The air cooled. The red peeled itself off the walls of my apartment and folded into the screen, and then into the corner of the screen, and then into a single pixel that went dark and left nothing behind but its afterimage. I was alone at my kitchen table. My laptop showed my work document, half finished, blank where the red had been. My phone lay face down and polite. In the hallway, the closet door had shut itself to an appropriate angle. The next night, the mirror didn't flicker. The water ran clear. The window glass reflected only my face and the square of night behind it. But sometimes, when the apartment is very quiet and my breathing forgets to be loud, a red glow gathers in the far corner, small as a pulse, patient as a waiting room. If I turn my head too quickly, it goes away. If I don't turn at all, it becomes a question that asks itself, do you like the red room? I say yes now in my head before it speaks. I say yes because that is the price of not turning around. Because some rooms are doorways, and some doorways are mouths, and some mouths are kind. If you feed them table scraps you never meant to eat. On good nights the red stays a dot. On bad ones it becomes a square, and the square becomes a window, and I sit very still and confess small true things until the room is too full of me to notice I have not given it all. And I don't turn. I do not turn. I let the politeness behind me lean and and never learn the back of my eyes. And in the morning, when the light is ordinary again, I brush my teeth with the door open and count the corners of my rooms, 1, 2, 3, 4, and try not to think about the fifth one that waits when the lamps are off. Do I like the red room? I like it enough to be alive. Now, on to the next story. The trouble didn't start when the hospital closed. It started when we pretended it was gone. Ashford sat on its hill like a red brick scab the town couldn't stop picking. 20 years of weather had gnawed the cornice, vines pulled at the lintels, windows gaped with black squares where glass used to be teeth. Still, the building kept its posture, chin up, listening. Teenagers dared each other through the front doors. Ghost hunter channels climbed the stairwells for clicks. We told each other the place was basically a ruin, which is something people say when they want a thing to stop having obligations. I'm a paramedic. Buildings that refuse to be finished are my workplace. You learn their moods the way you learn families. Which door sticks, which elevator lies, which hallway collects the fights. But a building isn't supposed to watch you back. You're not supposed to feel the light in a broken window tilt to follow you as you cross a parking lot. The first Ashford patient we got in the ER made it hard to keep performing indifference. He came barefoot through the automatic doors at 2 in the morning on a police escort, clothes torn, soles shredded by glass. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't high. He smelled like wet plaster and the inside of a pipe. He hugged his head as if he could make his skull one size smaller. "Don't let the windows see me," he told me when I knelt by the gurney. He wouldn't let me shine my light in his eyes. He flinched from the stainless panel on the cabinet. He turned the monitor screen away from himself with a frantic hand. "Cover them. Everything that can see you back." The attending ordered a sedative. Tamsin, the triage nurse, the one who keeps a spare banana in her pocket and hands me crackers when my blood sugar forgets to exist, stepped in with the syringe. The man looked straight at her and smiled with too many teeth for the rest of him. "They already marked you," he whispered. "It's too late. You looked." She flinched. He couldn't have known she'd gone to Ashford the week before with her boyfriend and 2 of his idiot friends to film some urbex, as if the word could make a century behave. I only knew because she'd laughed about graffiti, helped me written upside down, while we restocked oxygen. The sedative took him down. We tucked sheets over his cut feet and told the chart a polite lie, agitated, likely intoxication. Observe. 2 days later, Tamsin's husband found her at dawn, sitting on the sofa with both hands in her lap, staring at the black TV. Her eyes were wide enough to sting. She didn't blink when he said her name. When he switched the TV on, she flinched so hard she bit her tongue and started to cry without making a sound. They admitted her to psych, EEG normal, MRI clean. The note in the chart said, catatonia, with a question mark, because charts like punctuation when certainty is expensive. The rumor in the break room said it out loud. Ashford followed her home. A week later, we hauled in a college kid who'd gone in with friends. They said he'd paused at the second-floor bathroom mirror as a joke, then wouldn't stop looking. By the time they dragged him out, his palms were bloody from trying to scrape his own cheeks, as if his face were something stuck on wrong. He sobbed in our rig so hard he couldn't breathe. I bagged him gently and murmured like you do to a panicked horse. He choked out. He smiled first. I tried not to. It made me. That should have been enough to keep me away. But paramedics are bad at believing other people's lessons. We need to touch the stove ourselves. It was my partner who pushed. Dan chews gum like it owes him money, keeps his boots polished for luck, and thinks superstition should be paid in mockery, not reverence. Black mold, he said, when the third Ashford-adjacent call came in, and the plasma screens threw our faces back at us, a half-second slow. Snaky whatever, spores mess with your head. You think mold makes mirrors lie? I asked. I think mold makes people sick. Sick people interpret the world with whatever stories they preloaded. He flicked his gum into the trash with the cheerful spite of a man who has been wrong often and hates to add to the count. Off shift tomorrow, 30 minutes. N95s, we sniff and go. There are 1,000 places I won't follow a friend off duty. Bathrooms in bars, living rooms with men who say they don't need help and keep their fists in their pockets. The hill, I meant to say no, then I thought about Tamsin's wide eyes. I thought about the barefoot man's teeth. I said fine, and hated the part of me that can't leave a bandage unlifted. We parked by the rusted gate just before midnight. The moon looked like a peeled egg someone had held in a hand too long. Our flashlights cut cones through a smell like pennies and rain. The front door lay on its side like a tongue. We stepped over it. The lobby tile cracked under our boots. Graffiti shouted the vocabulary of 16. Help me kill her inside. A wonky pentagram layered until yesterday's jokes turned into a sediment of old fear. We swept the first corridor, patient room doors with narrow wired windows. Our lights stuttered our forms across the glass. Two tall shapes, masks on. I forced myself to keep my light on the floor because floors tell the truth about the day. See, Dan said, trying briskness. Mold and kids. Smell? I asked. We both sniffed like dogs. The air tasted metallic, a battery on a tongue. Mold threaded through. Sure, but not the headline. Halfway down the hall, he stopped. Hold up. My body recognized his tone before my brain did. I felt the small muscle under my eye start its private idiot tick. He raised his light at the nearest door's wired window. Two figures stood in the reflection. Me and Dan, except my reflected face wasn't moving. Not the eyelids, not the throat. When I lifted my hands slow to prove something stupid to myself, the woman in the glass stayed very still and watched me with interest. Dan's reflection tilted its head like a dog hearing a new word. Dan had not moved. We backed up in even steps. The figures in the next two windows pressed their palms to the glass with a soft, thick thud. Our hands stayed where we'd put them. In the third window, my reflected mouth twitched up, small and private, at something no one had said. We took the stairwell door at a trot that didn't look like fleeing, because pride is a habit you can do in PPE. The stairwell breathed cold. Every landing had a wired glass window. Every window had a face pressed to it. Some of those faces were ours, multiplied and scaled wrong like a child's collage. Some belonged to people I knew and didn't. Tamsin, the barefoot man, a boy who died in July with a pit bull whining at the curb. Every face wore an expression slightly out of time. On the third landing, a mouth opened, as if to ask me to hold something. I did not stop. The basement door stuck and then took offense. We slipped through into air that tasted like burned sugar and batteries. Mirrors lined the walls, standing, leaning, stacked in a jittery circle like teeth. Some wore ornate frames with the silver gone to cloud at the edges. Some were cheap rectangles with the safety film bubbled. Some were wardrobe doors that remembered shoulders. They faced inward, angled to catch a center point. Something stood at that point. I wish I could tell you it looked like a man. It didn't. It looked like the part of a mirror that refuses to be glass. A tall, narrow disobedience. Faces skinned across it. A deck riffling. Mine, Dan's, Tamsin's, the barefoot man's, the college kid. The mouth of each face was wrong. When mine surfaced, she smiled too soon. The mirrors in the circle shivered delicately, a dog's ears at a whistle. The thing lifted an arm and pointed. Its arm didn't have joints. It simply bent. We ran. There are choices you get to congratulate yourself for later. This wasn't one. This was the body choosing self over pride, and I led it back up the stairs between windows that tried to be eyes, through the lobby, over the tongue of the door, into night with our lungs on fire. In the passenger mirror of the rig, Dan's reflection smiled when he didn't. In the driver's side mirror, the version of me there breathed easier than I did, like she'd already finished something important and wouldn't share. We didn't file a report. You can't write something wore my face and tested the grin in the same field where you enter transported without incident. We didn't tell the charge nurse, or the cops we like, or each other. Not really. We did what night people do, rearranged small habits and pretended that was control. I taped a rag over the microwave door at the station. I put gaffer's tape over the shiny logo on my watch. Dan stopped wearing mirrored sunglasses. He turned the bathroom mirror to face the wall, like he was disciplining a child. We learned to look down. For a week, the town let us get away with it. Then we got sent to a domestic 2 blocks from the hill. The woman met us on the sidewalk, hugging herself so tightly, her sternum might have hummed. He won't stop smiling, she said, as if describing a small leak. He won't stop. Her husband stood in the kitchen with his back to us, facing the sliding glass door. His reflection in it, narrower, slicker, grinned at him. His jaw shook with the effort of not matching. I walked sideways so he had to look at me, not the glass. Hey, I said, that tone you learn for men who are losing to an enemy you can't tackle. Look at my nose, not past me, at me. He tried. He accidentally caught the stainless of the fridge. He smiled so hard I thought his lips would rip. We covered the door with a blanket on our way out. We got him to the rig without letting him glance in the rear window. We buckled him and breathed with him until his body remembered the trick, the way a drowned man remembers swimming. He calmed. My hand shook only afterward, when I had no more job to do. That night, because apparently I don't like myself, I drove past Ashford with the windows up and the radio off. Air from the hill tasted like pennies and old rain. The black windows shone like eyes that had learned not to blink. I parked at the bottom of the fence line and looked straight at the ground and still somehow knew the front door lay on its side, with its hinges still trying to finish their last argument. Back home at 3, my bathroom sink turned on by itself to a thread. In the mirror above it, condensation bloomed, where a face would be if I stood there. Letters followed, traced by a finger from the other side. Don't let the windows see me. The apostrophe was missing, like a small politeness left out in a hurry. I turned the tap off so slowly, the mirror didn't think I was refusing. I hung a towel over it and slept badly on top of the covers. For 6 days we stayed polite, and the town walked past the hill with its eyes on its shoes. Then Dan texted me a photo of his bathroom mirror, papered over with brown packing tape. Good, I replied, and meant it. He sent a second photo. The paper had puffed inward like something behind it had exhaled. He wrote, "Ha." I wrote back a list. No joking. Keep lights off after midnight. Don't stand where screens can catch you. And he sent only, K. He was late the next morning. He never texts when he's actually in trouble. He only texts jokes. I went to his building and knocked the rhythm that means, "Hey, it's me." He opened the door on the chain. He looked present and not. He asked, "Do I look weird?" Like a child asking if a lie shows. "You look like a man who needs coffee," I said. He smiled by accident. The brass of the door kept the smile like a smear. I unhooked the chain without asking and went straight to the bathroom. The paper bowed like a sail, then flattened. I peeled a corner. In the fog trapped under the tape, someone had drawn a tidy grin with 2 neat teeth. We worked. We didn't go back to the hill together. We told ourselves that was restraint, when it was really fatigue. Tamsin started to blink again. She kept a sheet over her TV. She avoided the black of her phone screen when it was idle. When I caught her reflection in the microwave, it waved before she did. She laughed once, the sound a person makes when a joke touches bone. Then I did the thing no one had asked for. I went back to Ashford alone. I brought a face shield, not for droplets, for glass. I wrapped my phone in gaffer's tape so it would be a brick and not a lake. I wore a watch with a scratched plastic crystal that refused to reflect. I kept my light on the floor, except when the stairs demanded respect. I talk to the building because I am the kind of person who talks to dogs, cars, and rooms. Just me, I said, stepping over the door's tongue. Small business. The stairwell windows were empty. That was worse somehow. The basement door yielded like a tooth you shouldn't have wiggled. Down there the circle remained, but with a gap in the far wall where mirrors had been. Someone had moved them. Where? Who sells old mirrors by the pound? Why did the thought of them standing in somebody's antique booth make my stomach go hard? The center held the tall wrongness. Faces slid across it like cards. I saw mine older by 30 years. Mouth careful, eyes practical. I saw Dan trying not to grin. I saw Tamsin, hair unbrushed, furious at being looked at. The thing rotated its faces with patience. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Hey, I said, because if you're going to be foolish, be polite. You don't get them, you hear me? You don't get my people. The mirrors shivered. The thing tilted. Behind me, at the door, something at floor height dragged one not hand across the threshold. The glass nearest the door leaned in, as if to listen. I stepped around the circle, away from the center. I put both palms against the nearest mirror. The glass was cool, then cold, then warm, the way a hand finds your temperature and tries to keep it. I talked to it the way I talk to a patient's child. Your job is to give people back what the day takes. Haircuts, ties, lipstick, who we are when we have to leave the house. Not this, not doors. The mirror hummed, old TV hum, the kind I could hear as a kid even when my parents thought the set was off. The surface steadied. The woman in the glass matched my breath again, not ahead of me, not with a borrowed mouth. I moved to the next mirror. Palms, talk, third, fourth. The oval with the ornate frame was most stubborn. It kept trying to paste Dan's mouth on my face. I pressed until my wrists ached and told it the list of what my hands have fixed. A kid choking on a grape, a bleeding man lowered gently so his mother wouldn't hear him hit, a prom dress hemmed over a bathtub while someone cried into a towel because she wanted to look like herself and not the idea she'd bought. The oval warmed and yielded my face back to me. I didn't finish the circle. Holiness is above my pay grade, but I spoke to enough surfaces that the room changed shape. The pressure eased, the way a bar quiets when one voice starts a story everyone needs to hear. The thing in the center dragged my face up again and made it grin like it knew something final. I didn't let it keep the moment. I turned my back on it. Movies tell you never to do that. Movies were filmed by people who adore looking. I faced the circle instead. You know your job, I told the glass. Do that. If something tells you you're a door, make it say please. If it can't, be a wall. The shape by the door skittered out. The wrongness at the center hissed. A sound like air abandoning a room. I left before the building remembered my name. I won't pretend I cured anything. People still come in shaking from the hill. The town pulls dumped mirrors out of the ravine like fish and stacks them at the transfer station. Thrift stores have stopped pretending they ever get decent wardrobe doors. Tamsin keeps a sheet over her TV and a hand over the camera on her laptop, and when her reflection waves first, she waves back, small, as if humoring an anxious child. Dan took the paper off his mirror and texted me a picture of a blank tile wall, with the caption it blinked first. I've stopped lecturing my friends. I talk to surfaces instead. I cover the bathroom mirror after midnight. I keep the rig's side mirrors aimed at the ground, unless I'm merging, and when I must look, I say aloud, give me what I need, not what you want. The black of my phone screen shows only my thumbprint smears. If it ever shows my mouth when my mouth isn't doing anything, I put it face down. Some mornings, I forget to uncover the mirror on my dresser before I leave for shift. I come home, and the towel is slightly askew, lifted by a finger whip. I smooth it flat. The glass feels cool under the cotton, as if someone on the other side is learning manners. I tell it the names of the people who need it. Kids with bobby pins in their teeth, old men trying to tie a tie again after a funeral, a woman who wants to see whether her hands make her look like her mother's hands yet. I tell it they matter more than whatever the hill thinks it is owed. When night presses its mouth to the window and asks for a smile, I let it fog the glass. The fog outlines an oval. I don't trace it. I stand there with my hands open, and when the fog clears and the glass remembers the streetlight and the opposite brick and my face, I say good, because sometimes approval is the only prayer that does any work. If you ask me whether Ashford is haunted, I'll say it's habitual. The town looked at the hill for too long, and the hill learned to look back. Mirrors are obedient. They were happy to help. The trick isn't to destroy them, it's to give them better instructions. We still carry people out who can't stop smiling. We still cover sliding doors with blankets on our way past. We still breathe with men until their chests remember to lift by themselves. On a good night, you can watch someone glance at a black surface and then decide not to, and that tiny act of refusal feels like a hinge choosing to stay a hinge. On a bad night, I wake and the bathroom sink is running again, a slender thread like a vein. The towel over the mirror has slipped. In the corner of the damp glass, two careful teeth appear in a neat little grin. I wipe them away with the side of my hand and go back to bed. In the morning, the glass shows me as I am, sleep-creased, competent, uninteresting, alive. I run a thumb along the line of my jaw in the reflection, and the woman there matches me, on time without expectation. The window behind her shows the river and a cloud, no extra faces, no borrowed smiles. If the hill wants more than that, it can wait for another town to forget a building. We're busy. We have real people to look after. Now, on to the next story. The first time the building screamed, it used the intercom. I was halfway through my midnight rounds at the Charlemagne, 12 floors of brick and stubbornness on the edge of the old financial district, when every speaker in the place clicked alive at once. Usually the intercom coughs and clears its throat before it learns what to say. That night, it found a pitch it liked and held it. The sound wasn't words. It was the absence of them stretched thin until they cut. Tenants opened their doors on chains and looked at me like I had promised them. Quiet and was now breaking contract. Somewhere a baby started crying, and the crying didn't stop when the sound did. It dwindled slowly like a coin spinning down on a counter and left an echo in the lobby that made me feel like I was listening to a recording of my own breathing. It's the wiring, I told Mrs. Patel in 3B, who watched me peel back the metal faceplate like I had a better plan than to stare at it. Old building, old bones. Sometimes they complain. Bones don't sing, she said, and shut the door gently so it wouldn't seem like she was slamming it in my face. I didn't sleep that morning because the building had decided I shouldn't. I sat at the desk in the night office with the logbook open and my pen placed neatly on the line for 0358, district-wide power hiccup, and watched the monitor that shows the front door. It's an old system, the kind with a burned-in after image of the doormat, and a polite ghost of every person who's ever stood too long in the lobby. When sunlight finally came and colored the marble, the monitor flickered once, and the after image of a woman in an old-fashioned coat straightened and walked away as if she'd been waiting all night and was late for an appointment I couldn't keep. Everyone has an opinion about the Charlemagne's age. The finance people say 1923 because that's when the money arrived. The romantics say 1899 because the cornies mean something to them. The plumbers say 1978 because that's when the last sensible person touched the main. For the tenants, it has always been here. For the neighborhood, it is the building the bus shouts before it stops. For me, it was supposed to be a winter job that turned into 7 years of listening for the noises a structure makes when it wants to be a person and can't. There's a story that the Charlemagne used to be a hotel for brokers and their mistresses. There's another story that it was a sanatorium for men who looked fine until they didn't. There's a third story that it was a boarding house for singers who never got past Tuesday night. In the basement, behind the boiler, there's a room that used to be a laundry with a drain, so wide the city came and measured it twice. In the laundry's far wall, there's a door that never opens but always rattles when you pass, as if the air has lodged there. After the intercom scream, I paid attention to rattles. 3 nights later, the building sang again, but this time it picked an instrument, the elevator cables. It started as a hum you only feel in your fillings. Then it found a note and pushed until the note insisted on being heard. The car lurched between 6 and 7 and hung in the wrong place long enough to make a man in a suit lose his religion. I climbed into the shaft with a flashlight and a prayer I don't use for anything else. The cables twitched like an animal pinned for examination. When I put my hand on the steel housing, the sound came up my arm like -10 weather. In the dark, I heard something that wasn't me move at the top of the hoistway. A shift, a footfall. I shined the light up. Dust glittered in a column like the inside of a throat. "Hello?" I asked, because I am polite even to dumb ideas. The hum cut off so sharply I swallowed it. The elevator shuddered, remembered its job, and slid into place with the exact same misalignment it's had since '98. In the morning, Mr. Dunning from 7F died in his armchair. He had been 87 and industrious about pretending not to be. The paramedics were precise and respectful. He might as well have been a sheriff in a dead town from the way the young ones handled him. I stood in the hall with my hands behind my back, because my father taught me it makes grief think you're ready for it. The intercom speaker in the ceiling buzzed softly, the way bars used to buzz when neon hummed a little prayer. Mrs. Palin 3B watched from her door, hand on the chain, mouth a tight white line you only see on women who have outlasted 6 kinds of men. When they wheeled him out, the intercom clicked alive and said very clearly, "Mr. Dunning, arriving." It wasn't my voice. It wasn't human. It was the building's idea of a word, and it picked the wrong one. I called a vendor about the intercom. He said they could put me on a list. I asked about the elevator sheaves. He told me that if I didn't want to replace the whole system, I should learn to sing. I left 2 messages for the management company and got one polite return call that said, "We hear you," which is what a body says to a tumor when it's busy. That night, at 2, the building woke me again. Not the speakers, the pipes. There's a particular moan old copper makes when it cools. There's another the risers make when the top floors shower at once, and the water has to choose. This wasn't that. This was every elbow and union and sag in the whole system, inhaling at once. Then the building exhaled a sound so low, I had to put my ear to the radiator to know it wasn't my heart. Mia in 12E called the desk. She is the type of person who uses my name when she's asking for something and nothing when she's done. "The apartment is crying," she said without preamble. "Steam heat does that," I said, sitting up. The couch springs have learned my shape too well. It's old. It remembers things it shouldn't. "No," she said. "It said my mother's name." "Names travel," I told her. "Through the pipes, through the shafts, someone on another floor. No one else knows it." She breathed, and the phone did a small, sympathetic click. "The old one, the one we don't say, because we started a new life." "Do you want me to come up?" "No," she said quickly, and then softer. "Yes, I took the stairs, because elevators make me feel watched now. The hallway on 12 holds sound like a chapel." Mia's door was open, chain off, which meant she wasn't thinking about safety anymore. She stood in the center of her living room, arms crossed tight, as if her ribs had promised to hold her together. The radiator in the corner was hot enough to be a sin. It hissed with effort, like an old man dressed too warm on a spring day. In the hiss, a breath, and then Anya. Mia covered her mouth. I went over and laid my palm on the iron. There was a rhythm to it, a slight lift at the end like a question. The pipes have tone. Sure, the whole building plays itself if you're inside it long enough. But this was formed. This was a name stuffed into steam like a note in a bottle. In the silence afterward, the floor above us let go a slow creak, not the movement of wood, but the kind weight makes when it decides to settle for the night. I looked up and saw in the ceiling stain by the window a shape I had never noticed, a woman's hair, or a tide that had chosen a direction. Mia said, "How long will this go on?" And I told her a lie I thought she could spend. "It was cold tonight. It will stop. The building complains when the weather changes." "I changed," she said, without looking at me. I started keeping a list of the building's noises. Not the usual, those I keep anyway, because if you don't write down what happens the same way every day, it grows teeth. The list had a column for time, one for location, one for what the sound sounded like before I told myself it was pipes. Intercom scream, 0358, building wide. Cable hum, 0112. Elevator hoistway, radiator whisper, 02912E. Anya. I didn't add Mr. Dunning's death because you should not let buildings make your lists for you. The Charlemagne didn't care whether I wrote it down. It had its own list. 2 days after the pipes spoke Mia's old name, something woke me again. Noises learn you. If you listen too hard, then they use themselves on you. The lobby camera showed the front door easing open without hands. Wind does that. There's a trick to old doors where the pressure and the hinge play a game, and the wideness of the hall invites. The door swung to, slow and ceremonial, then closed. The doormat shifted as if something had brushed it with a knee-length coat. A single gray hair blew across the tile and got stuck on the brass strip. On 7, the elevator sighed itself into place. On 6, a child cried once in his sleep. On 3, water moved behind a wall as if a person had leaned there to listen. On 9, the phone in the hall outside 9A, God knows why we still keep a hall phone on 9, rang once and kept the idea of ringing long after the sound died. At 4:14, the intercom popped twice and said perfectly clearly, "Don't answer the door." My hand was already on the knob to go check the lobby. I let go of it the way you let go of a stove when you realize it's on. I stood in the night office and listened to empty air, willing it to have nothing else to say. Across the hall, the bulletin board with outages and please break down your boxes and notice of annual lint trap clean had a new sheet pinned under a push pin with a bent head, a rectangle of paper cut from lined notebook, the edges ragged in the way a person's teeth rag a piece when they are trying to rip and keep it straight. On it, in a hand I didn't recognize, she calls before. I took it down and held it under the desk lamp, like a cop in a movie I don't believe in. The ink had bled in 2 spots, tears or careless. In the bottom right corner, tiny and careful, 12E. I went upstairs. Mia's door was closed, chain on. I knocked once with the softness of someone who knows doors and their limits. She didn't answer. Through the wood, I heard the slow turn of someone's foot on the floorboards, and then the deliberate nothing people make when they decide to pretend they aren't home. The city has a notion of itself in the small hours. It's not the one the tourism board prints. It's the shape of light on a cracked tile. It's the sound of a bus kneeling for a person who changes their mind. It's the man in the vestibule across the street who always reads the sports page first, even if the headline is about a war. The Charlemagne learned that shape and started wearing it. The list grew. 013, stairwell B, 3rd floor landing, whispers between banister and wall, tell her, then noise from the pipe. 0158, intercom selective, 6F only, baby monitor static, no baby in building in 6. 0247, basement, laundry drain, echo of wind where no wind should be, Rattle of the sealed door. 30 seconds later. 0322 7F. Vacant. Radio station from nowhere. The old big band hour cut mid-chorus. 0359 building wide. Pressure drop. Lungs of the building breath in. Intercom coughs but does not speak. I asked the daytime super to listen to the recordings. Old concrete, he said. It holds the old station broadcasts. We did this in '04 when the Riverlight building started singing Patsy Cline into the water heater. Don't get poetic. I called my mother because mothers are the saints of dumb calls. Have you ever heard of a banshee? I asked, not because I believe in the old country we never lived in, but because naming is a tool, except not one that wails outside a cottage door, one that uses what's available. Every building, my mother said, pragmatically, has a widow. That's the person who knows where the sound comes from. Find her and bring her a chair. What if the widow isn't a person? I asked. She still needs a chair, my mother said, and hung up to make soup for people who refused to ask. I carried a chair to the basement and set it near the drain, far enough that it wouldn't get wet if the old steam traps spit, close enough that the rattling door could see it if seeing happened in the dark. I sat. I told the room the names of tools the way I say them to apprentices. Here is a strap wrench. Here is a length of pipe. Here is the hammer you do not call a hammer because words make habits and habits make slips. After a long time, the rattle softened, and someone I couldn't see took a breath that made the dust lift off the chair as if a hand had brushed it. Mrs. Dunning, I said, because the building had started using the names of our dead, and I wanted to offer back a name that made sense. You don't have to stay. The drain sighed and resumed being a circle cut in concrete. The third week, Mia left 12E. She didn't tell me. People don't. When they fear I'll talk them out of it or into it. The moving truck showed, and I stood by the door holding the pad to keep it from slamming, because the door slams when it thinks you're making a mistake. She came down last with a duffel and the notebook paper sign that said "Esh-E calls" before folded into a small, dense square. She didn't look at me. I didn't make her. The elevator insisted on stopping 2 inches low. She stepped over it without swearing, which told me how tired she was. 2 nights later, 12E phoned the desk. I answered, not thinking. The line carried wind from far away, the specific sound of a stairwell when no one is in it, a breath. My name, spoken like a person practicing what a mouth could do. Arriving, the intercom said behind me. Who is this? I asked, which is the wrong question when calling has already chosen you. The line clicked and left the idea of being open. In 12E, the hallway light flickered twice. Slow, a shadow passed across the door like a person deciding not to knock. At 0302, someone pounded on 10A hard enough to clock the jam. I got there sweating and half-booted, keys in my hand as if they were more than shaped metal. Mr. Tone cracked the door and looked at me like it had done him a private wrong. Who? I asked. A woman with hair all the way down, he said, pantomiming with a hand to his scalp. She did not ask to be let in. She told me to open. What did she tell you? She told me, he said carefully, that she had come to tell me a thing I already knew. He looked over his shoulder into the dark. I did not let her. On the monitor for the front door, long hair blurred across the glass. The doormat lifted and settled. The door swung, then settled again. The elevator hardware on the roof made one emphatic clank like a cymbal. The call sheet in my pocket had Mr. Fromune's name, circled from the afternoon, when he told me he had an appointment Tuesday. Oncology, joking voice, eyes like someone reading a recipe, and not for cookies. I wrote in the log, because writing is a way to stay polite when you're talking to death. 0302, knock 10A. Did not open. That morning, Mr. Who's sister rang the bell and walked in like a person who belongs. She had on new shoes, and the kind of coat people keep for a wedding or a final appointment. She took the elevator without asking and came down an hour later with a small bag and a face arranged carefully into an expression she wouldn't have liked to be caught with in public. She nodded at me the way you nod at the hungry, grateful, apologizing, and left. The Charlemagne kept its throat clear for 2 days. I took the opportunity to do normal work, changed 2 boiler gaskets, one without swearing, freed a stuck sash in 8C, wrote a note to the management company suggesting winter paint would be useful in spring, swept salt from the lobby so the marble wouldn't forget itself. I almost believed in ordinary. On the third night, the building started using the phone. No one was at the desk with me at 2 a.m. because no one is, and the list of the building's noises had grown quiet enough that my hand started to look like my father's again instead of something I had borrowed. The phone on the wall rang once. It's the line people use when they want me right now. I picked up my pen first because old habits say that when a thing rings, you'll need to write down the name of a man who wants something you can't give. I answered. The room grew one size smaller. She calls before, the building said, into my ear in Mia's careful voice. Before what? I asked. Before, the building said, as if that explained anything a human could punctuate. The call ended. The line stayed open. The dial tone hummed under my skin, persuasive as a warm bath. I hung up. The phone rang again. Mrs. Patel stood in her doorway across the lobby and stared at me like a person who has decided that if you looked at a dog long enough, it would admit a trick. I smiled with half my mouth and lifted the receiver again because I don't know how not to. A whisper, "Don't answer the door." The line clicked dead. When you have lived inside a building long enough that you know which handrail hums and which handrail sighs, you start not believing in coincidences. I took the stairs to 9 because 9 keeps secrets. The hall phone there, Polaroid yellow, its cord coiled in the exact amount of mess the day is willing to stand, rested on its shelf like a pet. Its receiver was just barely off the hook, as if someone had set it down so gently. The phone wasn't sure whether to tell anyone the line was open. I lifted it, expecting to hear nothing. A sound came back, not voice. Wind through teeth, a woman catching her breath after running the kind of distance that wasn't yards. The little click of a tongue wetting its lip, then a word, not in English, then perfectly clear, arriving. I said, "You have to stop that." The line laughed once in a way I wouldn't call unkind and gave me a dial tone. Since the day my father died, I have believed in 2 kinds of warnings, the useful ones that tell you how to stand so your back will not break, and the useless ones that tell you a truck is coming too late for you to step aside. The Charlemagne offered both. The building said don't answer the door, and I listened, and Mrs. Korleova in 2D didn't, and the nurse who came with the oxygen tank did not have to ring twice. A week later, after 3 knockings that went unanswered and 2 pipes that whispered names I have not written because they are my own, I was down in the laundry checking the lint traps for the annual notice and thinking how no one ever reads it when the sealed door in the back wall rattled like someone on the other side had woken from a long sleep and wanted air. I set my palm against the cold paint. The rattle wasn't a hand. It was the way wind insists when it has something true to say, and the world has built something dumb where it needs to go. I pressed my ear to the seam and heard plumbing behave in a way no inspector would sign off on. Pipes set as a mouth, moving whispers along from floor to floor until they pooled here in this dumb end room where steam used to go to rest. In the whisper, my name, then another, a list like someone holding roll call at the end of a shift. "Do you want me to open it?" I asked the old paint. The building inhales when you make bad offers. It didn't. It waited. "I can't," I said, more to myself than to Brick. Even if I could, I'd be unwriting work other men did. They knew something I don't. The door rattled again, less angry, more irritated, like a woman who has told you politely twice and is now wasting both of your time. Then the building exhaled through the drain in a tone that lifted hairs. In it, a phrase my grandmother said when she didn't want us to go out on New Year's, not because of drunks, though there were those, not because of cars, because she calls before, and we are not always good at telling women no. After that, the calls became precise. The intercom wail moved from building wide to surgical. 2 tones and then arriving, then a floor, sometimes a number, sometimes a name. The building had decided to practice being bureaucratic about what it wanted. No one wanted to be the person I told about patterns in a night. I told them anyway. If you hear the speakers pop twice, I said, call me. Don't open, not until you see me. It's an old building, the management said. You can't frighten people with stories. It's a building that eats names, I said, and left the phone where it couldn't reach the rest of my mouth. The night I realized it had decided on me, I was unlocking the roof so the vent tech could get where he needed when the intercom clicked twice, building wide, and said my name, not my job. Arriving, it added like a boarding announcement. I stood very still. Not yet, I said to the nearest grill. The grill breathed on me in response, the clean dust smell of air that's tried. I felt the building collect itself. I went down. I put a chair in front of the door of the night office and sat with my hands on my knees like a man in a small town, police station in 1954, who knows who's coming and why. I removed the intercom fuse and set it on the desk so the building would know I was serious. Then set the fuse back where it belonged, because promises are tools you don't use unless you can hold them all the way. At 03:59, the intercom did not speak. At 04:03, someone knocked on the glass of the front door, polite like a widow. I did not answer. The door swung open an inch and closed again, because hinges have habits too. The mat lifted, settled, lifted. On the monitor, the burn-in of every person who has stood too long in the lobby grew brighter for a second, like a long exposure photograph, trying to collect itself. A woman in a coat that knew we used to have fur turned her head and faced the camera. Her mouth moved. I could not hear her. I lifted the receiver of the front desk phone. No dial tone. I set it down, and the phone rang. I picked up and heard the sound of the stairwell on 9. Then don't answer the door. I know, I said, to the building, to the stairwell, to my father, who taught me that if a man knocks at 3 in the morning, he is selling either Jesus or violence, and on the right street those are the same thing. I waited. At 04:14, the intercom in 12E crackled. The apartment Mia used to have, the one that still smelled faintly of rose soap when I'd fixed the sill last, and said in the careful voice the building had learned from her, she calls before. The pipes breathed in, out. The drain in the basement sighed. The elevator twitched and stayed where I had told it to. The knock on the front door came again, the polite kind, again, again. On the 4th knock, it lost patience, and the frame answered with a deep, low thud that made me think of trees that forget which direction is up. I stayed in the chair. The building stayed. At 04:25, the knock stopped. The doors to the mailboxes rattled in sequence like someone running their hand along a xylophone. A woman's hair crossed the lobby once, twice again, and then nothing. The phone breathed. The intercom slept. I waited until 05 to stand, because the shape of 4:30 belongs to the dead, and I didn't want to make a habit of violating their hour. When I did, the lobby smelled very faintly of rain, though nothing wet had come in from outside. The brass strip at the door had a single gray hair caught in it, and when I pinched it free, it crumbled like ash. At 6, the building did something I had never seen it do. It let morning in. The glass went the real color of dawn, cigarette paper, then tea. The marble remembered how to act expensive. The monitor lost some of its ghosts and showed only the doormat and the day. Mrs. Patel came down with a bag she refused help with, because refusing help has kept her alive a long time. She looked at me, and for the first time since intercom scream night, smiled with her whole face. "What did you do?" she asked. "Sat." I said, "Good." She said, "Men get up to make a mess. The Charlemagne has not stopped calling since. It doesn't call every night, and it doesn't always ask for anyone we know. Sometimes it says a name that belongs to a person no one remembers, until someone in 4C says she had that teacher in second grade who wore her hair high and said the names of birds in a way no man could stand. Sometimes it says a floor, and we all wait, and nothing happens, and you'd be a fool to think that's the good kind. Sometimes it whispers into the pipes in the stairwells and the hall phone on 9, and sometimes it offers no warning, and an apartment gets very quiet, and a person sits down, and the city grows one grief heavier and one voice louder when it asks for quiet. But it doesn't come in when we don't open. If you rent at the Charlemagne, I will tell you the rules the day you sign, because property managers print rules that matter to insurance, and I print rules that matter to staying. If the intercom pops twice, call me. If it says a name, don't repeat it. Names carry better when you lend them breath. If something knocks softly, look through the peephole, but don't look out the lens. Look at the frame. The frame will tell you if there's weight on the other side. If you hear a woman's hair move across the door, and it sounds exactly like your mother's when she shook rain out of it in the kitchen, make tea and wait for it to stop. If the elevator hums, take the stairs. If the hall phone rings on 9, let it. I will answer. I have the kind of ear the building prefers. I don't always like that, but I'm here. If you need to leave, leave quickly and take nothing that teaches the building your weight. If you have to stay, bring a chair. Sit somewhere the building can see you. Be patient. Fill a room with the names of tools and soups and street corners until the night remembers how ordinary it can be when it tries. If you must cry, cry at 5. 4:30 belongs to other business. We hung a small brass plate by the front door last week. The board approved it after arguing about fonts. It doesn't say Charlemagne or no bicycles in lobby, or even built 1923 like the finance men crave. It says, "Don't answer the door," and then, beneath, in smaller letters, a lawyer will pretend are a joke. She calls before. Most nights the plate is just a plate. Some nights, if you look at the lobby camera, when the intercom sleeps and the drains take their own kind of breath, you'll see the burn-in of a woman in a coat. Read the plate carefully, as if she's decided to be polite about it, and step back into the glass. Then the doormat will lift and settle, and the marble will warm under the idea of morning, and we'll begin again with laundry and packages, and boilers, and a hand-run vacuum, because machines wake ghosts, and someone somewhere in the neighborhood will tell a story about a banshee with an old voice. They're wrong about the voice, but they're not wrong about the telling. Now, on to the next story. The storm didn't take the town in a hurry. It arrived the way old debts do, announced by a change in air, a smell of wet metal, the gulls gone quiet, as if they'd been told a secret. The harbor smoothed itself under a sky that had lost its edges. Every house on the cliff shut a single blind, then another, the way eyes close when they don't want to see the ending. I sat my shift at the volunteer station with the radio tuned low. The lighthouse proper hadn't worked in years. Automation, budgets, but the beacon still spun on calm nights, because the town liked the look of it. The real work was below, at the end of the breakwater, where a pole held a LED that blinked red with bureaucratic rhythm. It never failed. It just wasn't enough. Before the first heavy drops, I saw them, 3 pale lanterns hovering low over the water, far outside the mouth of the harbor where no boats should be. Not the sodium lamps of the causeway, Not the shrimpers' deck lights. These floated like will-o'-the-wisps held by careful hands. They moved together, then apart, then together again, the way people walk when they are not sure whether to enter a house. I reached for the binoculars, even though the rain had started to stitch the air. Through the blur, I made out the shape of a skiff where the lanterns hung, too small for the swells the storm had already promised, too far out for anyone with sense. A figure at the bow lifted a light and turned, as if looking for a channel that had shifted while they blinked. "Don't," I said to the glass, to the weather, to anyone who might be listening. The radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice, businesslike, half bored. "Heads up, Station 2. Report of lights off Greystone. Anyone on eyes?" "I've got them," I said. "Skiff, lanterns. No call sign. They're not coming in." "Not coming in, how?" "They're not finding us," I said, and wished I had a better word for what the ocean does when it reorders maps. The old men at the station call those lights the drowned, not because they belong to the dead, though that's always in the corner of the story, but because they come from the shrine that fell into the bay 140 years ago. It sat where our breakwater sits now, a wooden pavilion built on pilings, a place to leave coins and wishes and thin paper charms that fluttered in wind that had learned manners from prayer flags. One storm took it. The pilings cracked, the floor tilted, the lanterns went under and kept burning where the eyes couldn't see. That's how they tell it, without smiling. Sometimes, on nights like this, the lights rise again and ask the living to remember the way in. I put the horn on the roof and sounded a warning. The low note went out across the water and came back wrong, bent by rain and tide. I grabbed the emergency bag because you always grab the bag, and I ran for the breakwater because you always run for the place where rocks look like help. By the time I reached the end, the lanterns had drawn closer, 3 small fires cupped in careful hands, level with the waves but not afraid of them, moving with the tide and against it. I could make out the skiff's hull now, pale plank on pale water, and the person at the bow, a boy in a raincoat that had lost its yellow, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes fixed on the red blink like he could stare at brighter. "Turn back," I shouted, pointless. The wind filed my words until they were too thin to pick up. The lantern nearest me dipped, then lifted, the international language of please. The boy turned in the direction the flame motioned. He didn't see me. He didn't see anything but light. I didn't have a boat. The town keeps the work skiff locked 2 doors down for liability reasons, which is another word for regret. What I had was rope and the old stories about what you do when the drowned borrow the night. You give them what they ask for and make sure it cannot hurt them. You toss them ladles with holes in the bottom so they can bail forever without sinking you. You answer when they count you, but wrong, so they cannot get the number they need to take you with them. You carry salt in your pocket and throw it over your shoulder as if the ocean might be surprised by that memory. The boy raised his lantern high. It was made in the old way, wooden frame, rice paper sides, a wick that did not mind rain. He swung it toward the gap in the breakwater where the old foundation stones still show under low tide. No gap existed now. The storm had topped the rocks with a single long muscle of water. He stepped forward with the easy confidence of someone who has crossed this way 100 times in a summer that is not this one. "Stop," I yelled, and threw the coil. The line arced, fell short. Another wave lifted the skiff and turned it a fraction. The lanterns shifted to match, patient as nurses. A hand appeared at the stern. Another figure, older, shoulders big enough to carry nets and names. He said something to the boy I couldn't hear. The boy shook his head. The older one looked up at the breakwater with eyes that were neither frightened nor angry, just aware, the way you are when you have taken inventory of your luck and found it insufficient. "Take the end," I shouted and threw again, farther into the shape of the wind. praying the rope would decide to be heavy where it needed to be. It landed against the skiff's port side with a slap that sounded like a door closing. The older man caught it in one hand without looking. He didn't tie it, he just held on, like a man is a cleat until he isn't. The lanterns dipped again, once, twice. The boy turned them toward the break in the rocks that wasn't there, and for a second, just one, the water lifted as if rising to the idea of a channel. The skiff slid in. The rope went taut between my hands and the older man's. It hummed. "Let it go," I called, because the humming had a pitch I knew from the vent above my bed on nights when the wind wants to be a song. "Let it go, and follow me, but the drowned don't let you do both. If you drop the connection, the lights move on, patient, polite, expectant. If you hold the connection, they guide you, and their idea of safety is not yours." The boy stepped onto a rock that had no dry on it. The older man's hand tightened on the rope. The skiff slid sideways and did not lift with the wave that should have lifted it. The lantern ceased to need hands. I don't make heroic decisions. I do the next sensible thing badly and with sincerity. I wrapped the line twice around the iron post at the end of the breakwater and leaned my weight into it and prayed I wouldn't get the older man killed by giving him something to fight that wasn't the ocean. "Turn your light," I yelled at the boy, because light is language, and he was listening to the wrong conversation. "Turn it to me." He did, not because I had any authority, but because I sounded like a shoreline, and he had forgotten how to find one. He swung the lantern toward my face, and for a second we saw each other plain. His eyes were not young at all. Mine were tired. Rain made us both strangers. The lantern's flame licked my cheek without burning. It smelled like salt and something older than oils. I lifted my free hand and shaped the air as if it were a knob. I turned the boy's lantern toward the red blink at the end of the pole, and then past it to the left where the channel actually ran tonight, which is not where it ran last week and never where it plans to run tomorrow. It took him a moment to understand that I was asking him not to follow the light to the light, but to aim the light at the way. The older man read it first. Something in his shoulders changed from resisting to remembering. He shifted his weight. He didn't pull. He held. The rope hummed a new note. The skiff found water that wanted it. The three lanterns moved to match, one leading a fraction, one flanking, one hanging back as if to count. The boy held his higher. The older man stepped closer to the center of the boat, feet following memory, not map. Together we slid the skiff along the wet top of the breakwater's logic until the inside water calmed enough to welcome them. When the bow kissed the lee side of the rocks, the older man let the rope fall. The boy's lantern guttered and flared, then burned steady. I dropped to my knees and hauled until the skiff's hull scraped the stones, and the boy stumbled into the small and particular gravity of safety. He looked at me like a person looks at a window after getting out of a locked room. The older man tied nothing, thanked no one. He was the kind of grateful the ocean approves of. Quiet, practical, already attending to the next thing. Behind them, outside the mouth, the three pale lanterns hovered a moment, then drew apart, then sank, slowly, as if reluctant to leave a conversation they had almost finished. The surface closed over them, as cleanly as a lid. The red blink resumed its rhythm. The storm decided to take itself more seriously, and began. We brought the skiff up the inside of the wall in quick, small pulls, the boy carrying his light like a child carries a cat, possessive, careful, reverent to a degree that does not admit reason. When we reached the inner dock, neighbors gathered in that way, small towns do, all at once and out of nowhere, with blankets and questions. No one asked about the other lights. They knew better. Someone pressed a mug into the boy's hand. Someone else clapped the older man's shoulder and missed the way he flinched. Later, when the radio had finished with its relief, and the checklist had been checked twice, and the rain decided to become a wall rather than a suggestion, I went back to the end of the breakwater alone. The surface outside boiled with white, in patterns only the old men could name. Somewhere under that muscle lay pilings that had once held the shrine, lantern hooks that had once held prayers, paper that had once held names. Somewhere under that, older still, lay the reasons any of us ask the sea to let us cross it, and the sea's slow answers. I tossed a handful of salt into the air because it was in my pocket, and because superstition is a promise you make to everything you can't fix. The wind took it and returned a little to my face, which is the sea's way of saying in you. The next morning, the boy's mother found me at the station with a pie and a letter in bad pen. The pie was necessary, the letter was not. It said nothing about lanterns. It didn't mention the way the rope hummed. It thanked me for being outside when someone was lost. He kept the lamp, she said, when I asked. His grandfather says it's ours. The older man was the boy's grandfather. Then, of course, carrying a skiff through rain is a heritage. He stood at the door while his daughter spoke. He didn't look inside. His hair had a new white in it, the kind storms paint when they need to leave a record. You'll see them again, he said flatly. Not a threat, a weather report. Maybe for us, maybe not. I nodded. The pie smelled like cinnamon and apology. My hands ached where the rope had asked questions they answered poorly. Some nights, long after the breakwater dried and the pole blinked and the beacon on the hill spun out of nostalgia, the three pale lanterns return and hang far outside, polite and patient, asking to be followed by anyone who has a reason. I keep rope near the door. I keep salt in my pocket, not because it changes water, it doesn't, but because it changes me slightly, and that seems to be the bargain. If the lights want me, they will know my name the way the fog did. I will choose to stay, then choose again and again until the choice gains weight. If you see old light on new water, aim yours at the way, not the flame. Throw holes to the hands that ask, don't count correctly. And if a lantern rises dripping from a place where wood should not remember fire, treat it like a neighbor and not like a sign. The shrine still burns down there. Some prayers take longer to finish than others. On our side of the surface, we keep an eye on the channel and pretend the red blink is sufficient. On most nights it is. On the others, bring rope.